Chapter 995. She had never thought that she would encounter such a thing. The environment that she was used to in the past suddenly seemed to be an ice cave, with ice thorns everywhere. She felt pain all over her body with every step she took. She walked to the gate of 11 base in a daze and wanted to go out, but she still stopped. When she walked to the gate, she looked blankly at the wide suburb night outside the base. She was asking Feng Ji, did she do anything wrong? If she didn't do anything wrong, why did she have to be treated like this? If she didn't do anything wrong, why did she have to leave? The girl standing in front of the base turned and walked back. She was thinking. In fact, there were still many clues. For example, she had long heard of the engagement between the Li family and the Feng family, but when Li Nanheng said he wouldn't marry Feng Mingzhu, she believed him, but she forgot the status of the Li family and the Feng family in the American Chinese community. If it wasn't true, how could they allow such rumors to spread? And even the noble Miss Feng often talked about it. For example, Li Nanheng seemed to be very polite to the Feng family. When she took back the bag for the old lady on the street, she could feel it when they had dinner that night. Although Li Nanheng didn't talk much, he was usually arrogant and domineering in front of the Feng family, which meant that the Li family and the Feng family were indeed very familiar with each other. For example, Li Nanheng only left the base for a few days, but he seemed to be saying goodbye before he left. Feng Ling stood on the training ground for a long time and looked at her phone. It was already more than an hour later than the usual time when Li Nanheng went back to rest. She looked up at Li Nanheng's room. The light in the room was off. Even though she knew that he wouldn't come back at this time, at that moment, Feng Ling really hoped that a miracle would happen. She hoped that the light in the room would be on, and she hoped that Li Nanheng would come out of the window, stand on the balcony smoking, squint at her with a faint smile and then mock her. "Fool, how dare you believe all the rumors?" It wasn't until she was tired of standing that she looked away from the dark room and walked straight to the door. Kay couldn't find Feng Ling that night. When he heard the gunshots, he came down to have a look, but he didn't see her. He didn't know where she had gone until Feng Ling returned downstairs. As soon as she saw Kay squatting in front of the door smoking, Feng Ling looked at him calmly as if she didn't see him and walked past him. "Hey, Feng Ling." Seeing that she was back, Kay suddenly stood up and stamped out the cigarette butt. "Let's go and play cards. They want to play with us today, and they also called the new drill master. There are not many training tasks on the weekend tomorrow. Let's play until dawn." Feng Ling shook her head and walked in steadily. She didn't need others to distract her in this way, and she didn't need others to accompany her. She was clear about her own affairs and she knew what she should and shouldn't do. She was just careless when she should have been guarding her heart, that's all. "Feng Ling, I'm calling you to play cards," Kay called her again. "I'm not fighting anymore. You guys fight." "How can you not go? We want a 3v3. However, no matter what Kay said, Feng Ling still went upstairs without looking back. Seeing Feng Ling like this, Kay stood there helplessly. He could see that the relationship between Boss Li and Feng Ling was not a simple brotherly relationship. But the elders of the Li family probably wouldn't accept the fact that Boss Li liked men. He felt that if Boss Li didn't get married, he would be unfilial, but if he did, he would be heartless. No matter what he did, he wouldn't be a good person. Feng Ling went back to her room. But after taking a shower, she couldn't fall asleep. At 1 o'clock in the morning, when there was no one around, she went out to run laps in a white short-sleeved t-shirt. She didn't know how long she ran. In short, she ran until she was panting violently and sweating all over. She was so tired that she felt that she could lie on the bed and fall asleep at any time. Then she dragged her tired body back to her room. This time, after taking a shower, she lay on the bed. Her body was so tired that she couldn't even get up, but she still didn't feel sleepy at all. She just closed her eyes and forced herself to sleep for a while. 20 minutes later, she opened her eyes. Her heart was beating fast after the exercise, but she found that she couldn't feel her heartbeat. It seemed that she was very numb. She couldn't fall asleep, so she suddenly got up, went to the corner of the room and opened a cabinet there. There were 3 bottles of wine in the cabinet, 1 bottle of white wine, 1 bottle of foreign wine, and 1 bottle of red wine. These were all given to her by Han Jin several times when he was in a good mood, but she didn't drink them. She had given Boss Li wine once before, but Han Jin had too many bottles of wine and gave them to whoever he liked. Maybe because Han Jin liked her so much, he simply gave her several bottles. Feng Ling didn't know which kind of wine was good, so she took out the 58 proof brandy, opened the window with the bottle, and looked at the dark balcony next door. Then she leaned against the balcony railing, raised the bottle and took a sip. She had never drunk this kind of brandy before. It didn't taste good, but it didn't seem to be as bad as those white wine. She smacked her lips a few times and felt that there seemed to be a little sweetness in her mouth. The sweetness after the wine was very wonderful. She never drank, so she really couldn't sleep tonight. Anyway, according to Kay and the others' understanding of her, if she was too drunk to get out of bed tomorrow and didn't go to training, Kay and the others would find a suitable reason to ask for leave for her. In short, it didn't matter even if she was drunk. Get drunk once. She would forget everything after getting drunk once. The short-haired girl leaned against the balcony, raised the wine in her hand again, took a big sip, and then swallowed it with a frown. And then, one sip after another and another sip after another. But even though she felt that she was in a trance, Feng Ling felt that she was unprecedentedly sober. She knew very well that behind the name Feng Ling was an unknown orphan, a small role who couldn't bring any benefits to the Li family, and an existence that even she didn't know how to survive in this world. Early the next morning, Feng Ling, who had slept drunk on the balcony all night, felt her body was suddenly cold and hot, and her head was splitting. She turned over and opened her eyes, only to find that she had fallen asleep on the balcony. The weather last night was almost -3 or 4 degrees, but she actually fell asleep here in a short-sleeved t-shirt. Enduring the headache, she was about to sit up, but suddenly she heard a violent and urgent knock on the door. Chapter 996. The knocking on the door did not stop, and it was very urgent. She struggled to get up from the ground, but her legs were so weak that she staggered and fell directly into the French window that had been open all night. Her head hit the leg of the table near the window, and she felt a strong sense of dizziness in her head. Then the door was suddenly kicked open. She raised her head, opened her eyes, and saw that it was several members of the other teams of the base who came in. After coming in, they looked at her expressionlessly, and then quickly opened all the drawers in her room, rummaged through all her things and put them into a big bag. Then they picked up the 2 suitcases she put under the bed and walked out. "What are you doing?" Seeing their movements, Feng Ling had a bad feeling in her heart. She frowned and asked hoarsely. At the same time, the other 2 members came over and pulled her up from the ground. Feeling the heat on her arms and the strong smell of alcohol on her body, they directly carried her out. "Let me go." Feng Ling tried to struggle, but now her strength seemed to have been hollowed out. She couldn't even stand steadily, but she was carried out by the 2 people. When those people opened her drawer expressionlessly and took away all her things, she already had a strong premonition. These people suddenly rushed in and acted so rudely. Maybe her gender had been discovered. But who was going to take away her things? Feng Ling was so uncomfortable that she didn't even have the strength to struggle. When she was taken to the widest training ground opposite the base hall, she was still in a trance and didn't have time to look at the members of the base standing around. It seemed that the members of all the teams were here, almost forming a circle nearby. Then she saw the elders standing in front of her. They were the elders of the Li family. For so many years, they had never directly appeared in the base. Usually, they just passed by in cars and never showed up in front of so many people. Just as Feng Ling's heart was beating wildly, those people took her over to the elders of the Li family and threw her to the ground mercilessly. Feng Ling was originally lifted up and could not stand steadily. This time she fell forward to the ground. The ground here was full of mud and gravel. Under the short-sleeved t-shirt, the skin on his hands and forearms were instantly scraped. It was a burning pain, and even his knees were knocked hard on the ground. At the moment when Feng Ling was pushed to the ground, the people behind her poured all the things in the bags to the ground, opened her 2 suitcases, took them to the elders of the Li family and laid them flat. All the things placed in them fell into everyone's eyes. Seeing the packs of sanitary napkins on the ground and the long strips of cloth in the suitcase, which were suspected to be chest wrappings, the members of the base all looked at her differently. Some were surprised, some were enlightened, and some were confused. Was Feng Ling really a woman? Feng Ling raised her head with some difficulty. Her eyes were filled with the discomfort of the hangover and the anger in her heart because the truth had been revealed. More and more red veins appeared in her eyes. She grabbed the hard soil on the ground and raised her head to look at the elders who were looking at her with disdain and anger. "Feng Ling, do you need us to say more?" Li Junyan looked at the things used by women on the ground and his eyes were filled with dissatisfaction and disdain. Feng Ling's hands were still gripping the ground tightly, and she looked at him with reddened eyes. He was Li Nanheng's biological grandfather. Last time, when she was in trouble in the military in order to protect Li Nanheng's image, he had more or less spoken up for her in front of the military. Although his direct purpose was to protect Li Nanheng and the Li family's image, they had still met once. Li Nanheng's eyes were red. The other elders stood behind Li Junyan and whispered to each other, "Mingzhu has always suspected this. I didn't believe it, but I didn't expect it to be true." Fortunately, Mingzhu found the evidence. Otherwise we wouldn't have come here. If we didn't know about this, we would have allowed such a little girl to stir up trouble in the base. That's right. It's outrageous. A young girl actually pretended to be a man and mingled with a group of men. Nanheng was so protective of her and ignored the Feng family's engagement. I think he must have been bewitched by this little vixen. These words were just a private discussion among the elders. Boss Li Junyan still looked coldly at Feng Ling, who was lying on the ground. You hid in the base for so long. What's your purpose? Kay and the others were also in the crowd. When they saw those things, they knew that the rumors were true. However, seeing Feng Ling lying there in a dazed and seemingly weak state, they remembered that Boss Li had just gotten married yesterday. It must have hurt her a lot. Today, the elders of the Li family actually came to find her. Looking at the things on the ground, it proved that she was indeed a woman. Kay and the members of the sniper team looked at each other, and their faces were all a bit ugly. Of course, their faces were ugly not because the fact that Feng Ling was a woman had been exposed, but because Feng Ling looked like she could be slaughtered at any time, which really made them unable to bear it. However, the elders of the Li family were all here, and they couldn't say or do anything. If they stood up to help Feng Ling up now, the rumor that Feng Ling had messed up the base would be confirmed. They would say that she had an ambiguous relationship with the men in the base, which would only hurt her more. I'll give you two choices. First, tell me your purpose and the reason for staying in the base, and then pack up and get out of the base. Second, throw away all your things and get out. Li Junyan narrowed his eyes coldly at Feng Ling, who was lying on the ground. It took Feng Ling a long time to find the strength to speak, but her voice was low and hoarse. Even if she wanted to speak clearly, her voice couldn't be much higher. The dizziness in her mind almost made her collapse, but in such a situation she had to stay awake. Chapter 997. Aren't you ashamed to say that? 11 base never accepts women, but you disguised yourself as a man for so long in order to sneak into the base? I've lived like this since I was a child. I didn't deliberately disguise myself. I was like this before I entered the base. Seeing that she couldn't hide it anymore, Feng Ling simply told the truth. For me, there's no difference between a man and a woman. It doesn't make any difference. You're a woman mingling with men. You say it doesn't make any difference, but as long as anyone knows that you're a woman, do you think these guys who don't even have a chance to see a woman in the base won't be tempted? I think you're shameless to a certain extent. If we found out a little later, your room would have been a brothel. Hearing Grandfather Li's words, Kay and the others immediately frowned, especially Kay, who couldn't help but come out and say, "No, Mr. Li, if you know Feng Ling's character, you'll know that she can't do that kind of thing. She usually keeps a distance from many people in the base, and even the members of our sniper team don't often hang out with her. She's very cold to others. It's definitely not what you think. Her character is definitely worth testing, and she has always adhered to the system of the base." Tam hurriedly pulled Kay back and lowered his voice to say, "Don't talk. Don't you see that Mr. Li is angry?" Of course, Kay knew that, but it was too much to say that to Feng Ling. Grandfather Li first turned his eyes to Kay's face, and then coldly looked at Feng Ling, who was lying on the ground. She stinks of alcohol and can't even arrive on time for training. Obviously she has a hangover all night. How can you say that she adheres to the system of the base and that her character is worth testing? Kay was speechless. Yesterday, it was not surprising that Feng Ling drank last night. But this kind of thing couldn't be explained here at all. If Mr. Li knew that the relationship between Feng Ling and Boss Li had already gone beyond the scope of ambiguity, perhaps he would only be more ruthless. Stinks of alcohol. Feng Ling suddenly wanted to laugh. She raised her eyes to look at the coldness in Grandfather Li's eyes. She wanted to regain her dignity and wanted to get up, but found that she couldn't do it at this moment. All her private things were thrown around for everyone to see and became the topic of conversation. She lay on the ground, looking up at the real owner of 11 base. Even if Li Nanheng was the behind-the-scenes boss of 11 base, Grandfather Li was his grandfather and his elder. No matter what, Grandfather Li was still above him. So, her dignity was trampled underfoot. Thus, she really laughed and slowly let go of the mud that had been crushed by her. She said in a low voice, "I'm very sorry to let Elder Li see me in such a sorry state. People say that as long as you do one thing wrong, everything you've done will be denied. So, I've already been denied by 11 base, right? Really? How dare you ask me? What right do you have to ask me?" Li Junyan scolded coldly. "It's already polite of us to use this method to confirm that you are a woman instead of asking people to strip you naked. Do you think you can still stay in 11 base?" Hearing this, the only hope in Feng Ling's heart was instantly shattered. She had once thought that if she could no longer keep her secret, Perhaps she would find a suitable time to leave. Perhaps she would die outside during a mission. That way no one would know about it. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. However, it seemed that everything did not go in the direction she thought. She was actually kicked out of 11 base in such a humiliating way. She was about to be kicked out of this place where she had lived for several years, the home she thought was her home. She lowered her head and continued to laugh, digging her fingers into the mud again. "So, Mr. Lee, do you mean to drive me away today?" she asked hoarsely. Seeing her lying on the ground weakly but still so proud, the other elders walked over and said coldly, "Little girl, who gave you the courage to live in 11 base for so long? What the base taught you is to show how powerful you are as a woman here. Everything you have now is given to you by 11 base. I think the money you have earned from missions over the years is enough for you, an orphan with no parents, to live a good life outside. We didn't confiscate all your things but just let you leave the base. Why do you come back to bite us?" An orphan with no parents. Feng Ling gritted her teeth and finally managed to sit up. Sitting on the ground, no one came to help her. Most people didn't want to help her, and a small number of people didn't dare to help her. She staggered to her feet with great effort, but she stood there swaying with the smell of alcohol all over her body. When she finally stood firm, her legs were so weak that she could fall at any time. She smiled and raised her eyes to look at them. "So you've investigated me thoroughly and then came to the base to throw my things on the ground, just to let everyone see that I, Feng Ling, am a woman, and then under such circumstances, you chased me away and made it impossible for me to return to 11 base in the future, right? You still want to come back?" The elders immediately glanced at her coldly, their eyes full of disdain. Feng Ling smiled coldly. "Since I was driven out so shamelessly and disgracefully, how could I come back? It's good that you know. The base will not accept you again." With that, the elders turned around and walked into the base hall with the help of a few base members who were good at reading eyes. Obviously, they would no longer pay attention to her. Since the elders had left, the people around them didn't dare to watch anymore and gradually dispersed. However, there were still people who would point in her direction and make comments. Then they looked at her flat chest under the t-shirt and felt it was strange. Then they talked about the chest wrappings in the box. There were all kinds of topics. But no one mentioned why Feng Ling couldn't stay. Why couldn't a woman stay? When those people walked far away and walked to the training ground that only they were qualified to set foot on to do daily training, Feng Ling stood on the empty ground. Behind her was the cold door of the base that had been closed, and at her feet were her things and 2 suitcases thrown all over the ground. She silently looked at the ground under her feet, looked at the things at her feet, and then staggered back, slowly bent down with some difficulty to pick up the things on the ground. Chapter 998. What should we do? Lin Cheng and Tam looked back at Lei Peng, who was standing behind them, and then the 3 of them looked at Kay, who had been frowning. Almost everyone on the field had left, and there were only a few people left. These people were all very familiar with Feng Ling, including the members of Team 1. Old Master Li was here. If they went up to help, it would be a slap to Old Master Li's face. If some busybody went to Old Master Li and told him, none of them would end up well. But seeing Feng Ling like this, they really couldn't stand it anymore. "How do I know? Boss Li hasn't come back yet. I'm afraid he doesn't know something happened in the base. How could Boss know? I heard that Boss won't be back for at least 7 days, and for some reason, it seems that it's not convenient to contact him recently. His phone is not turned on. Try calling Boss Li? Do you have Boss's phone number?" "I do," Kay said as he picked up his phone, but after making the call, he put it down not long after and said in a muffled voice, "It's turned off." "What the F***ck do you guys think is going on? Feng Ling is actually a woman. She's usually so powerful, but she's actually a woman. This is enough to destroy my worldview. But a woman is a woman. She didn't do anything wrong. Why was she suddenly driven out like this? And Feng Ling reeks of alcohol and looks pale. Is she sick? Now that she's driven out of the base in such a situation, if something happens to her outside, when Boss comes back and asks about it, we'll all be in trouble. If only Boss is in the base. If Boss is here, who dares to do this to Feng Ling? Haha, Boss is now with his newlywed wife. How can he care about Feng Ling? Don't talk nonsense. I always feel that Boss has some difficulties. Everyone knows how he treats Feng Ling. Feng Ling is too pitiful now. I really can't stand it anymore. How can we contact Boss? If he could be easily contacted, do you think these old men would take this opportunity to come over? They clearly want to drive Feng Ling out. Her face is completely ruined. Even if Boss Li goes to find her in the future, she probably won't return to the base. This is the effect they want. They want her to leave by herself. This is too much. Feng Ling's legs really couldn't support her. Originally she wanted to bend down, but in the end she still knelt on the ground. The dizziness in her mind was too severe. The influence of the wine last night was too great. Right now her whole body was cold, but when she touched her arm, it seemed to be boiling hot. Could it be that he got a fever from the cold wind after he passed out on the balcony last night? She slowly raised her hand and slowly picked up the things on the ground one by one. She put the sanitary napkin and breast wrap into the suitcase, and then put them under the clothes. Then she picked up the other clothes and things one by one. She couldn't stand up and didn't have the strength to, so she just lay on the ground and stretched out her arms to pick them up. When she finished packing a suitcase, she put her hands on the ground and took a deep breath. Just when she was about to pick up other things to pack up another suitcase, suddenly, a hand reached over. She paused, turned around and saw Kay, who had walked over without her noticing. "Let me help you." Kay's face darkened. Without saying anything, he picked up the things that had been thrown all over the ground and handed them to her. Feng Ling sat on the ground, looked at Kay's face, slowly withdrew her gaze and said lightly, "Thank you." Hearing that she still didn't want to show too much emotion, Kay frowned slightly. "Bosley doesn't know these things yet. Do you want to wait for him to come back?" Feng Ling took the things he handed over and didn't say anything because he mentioned Nanheng. She turned her head and continued to put the things into the suitcase. Seeing that she didn't want to mention Bosley now, Kay didn't say anything more and just continued to help her pick up things. Then more and more people came to Feng Ling. Kay, Tam, Lei Peng, Lin Qing, and the other 4 members of the sniper team were all helping her pick up things. After a while, Fat Tai, who had been hesitating not far away, also quickly came to help, De Hu and many other people. Many of the people who had interacted with her and gone on missions with her came back at the same time less than 10 minutes after they left. Feng Ling looked at them and didn't speak until Kay picked her up from the ground and looked at her with a frown. "Why are you so hot?" "I'm fine, thank you." Her identity as a woman had been exposed. Feng Ling didn't want to affect them and was about to pull her hand out of his arm. Kay held her tightly. "Why are you acting like an outsider? In my eyes, whether you are a man or a woman, you are my brother. There is no difference. You can't leave now. Even if the Li family's grandfather wants to drive you away, he didn't ask you to leave now. You have a fever. Go to the infirmary to find Dr. Wen and take some medicine." "No." Feng Ling lowered her head helplessly. She couldn't break free from him. Her strength was really no match for theirs, so she could only lower her head and say softly, "Sorry, I lied to you for so long." The eyes of the people around her instantly reddened because of her apology. Even though they were all men, they were suddenly affected by such an atmosphere in an instant and felt a little sentimental. "Why are you apologizing? In our eyes it doesn't matter whether you are a man or a woman. We only know Feng Ling Da Hu of Team 1 side. But I didn't expect that such a thing would happen so soon after Bosley left. If Bosley was here, it doesn't make any difference whether he is here or not. Bosley is so busy. Don't bother him," Feng Ling said lightly and then took the suitcase. "Goodbye." Seeing that she was about to leave, Kay and Tam looked at each other and pulled her arm hard. "No, if you don't want to stay in the base now, we'll send you to a small hotel nearby. We'll wait for Bosley to come back." Feng Ling didn't speak and walked out. They still stopped in front of her. Especially Kay. "Feng Ling, wait for Bosley to come back." Feng Ling suddenly smiled and raised her bloodshot eyes to look at him. "He's already married. Why should I wait for him?" Kay and the others were instantly speechless. Chapter 999. He was already married. Who could stop her? What other reason could there be to stop her? Feng Ling was not the only one who couldn't accept the fact that Li Nanheng suddenly got married. No one had expected this, so no one could say anything to make her accept it. She used to think that it was just a little bit of intimacy between men beyond the scope of friendship. But now Feng Ling was a woman. It was impossible that Bosley didn't know. But he got married. Seeing that Feng Ling was weak but still carrying the suitcase, Kay hurriedly pulled her suitcase and said, "There are still a lot of things in your room that haven't been packed. It's too embarrassing to leave with the suitcase. Go back and pack yourself first." The corners of Feng Ling's mouth moved slightly, but it was clearly not a smile. Even the most embarrassing situation is only like this. How embarrassing can it be? Kay couldn't speak, but even if he knew there was no suitable reason to persuade her, he still pulled her suitcase hard. "Feng Ling, don't go." Feng Ling paused but didn't look back. She clenched the handle of the suitcase tightly. I said wait for Bosley to come back because the rule that women are not allowed to enter the base is an old rule and should have been changed long ago. You absolutely meet the standard in all aspects. There can be female soldiers in the army. Why can't our 11 base have female soldiers? We will never look at you with prejudice. We grew up and trained together in the base. This kind of relationship can't be eliminated because of gender differences. If you have any difficulties we can help you, but if you leave now Feng Ling lowered her head to look at the shoes on her feet. They were all muddy and dirty. Her pants were also covered in mud from falling on the ground. Her entire body was in a mess and her arms were burning with pain. There were all kinds of bloody scratches on her skin. She had always been incompatible with this place, including Li Nanheng. No matter how hard Kay tried, he could still feel that Feng Ling was forcibly pulling the suitcase away. She really wanted to leave and had no intention of hesitating or compromising. Feng Ling, seal. Kay finally let go under her insistence. She put the suitcases on both sides of her body. Even though she was in a mess, she stood upright. The people around her looked at her and saw her determination. There was heartache and reluctance in their eyes, but everyone knew that what Grandfather Li did today was to make it impossible for her to turn back. Not to mention these members, even Drill Master Han Jin and Xiao Su, who were usually in charge, couldn't even say a word at this time. The Li family was very angry because she, a woman, had been in the base for so many years. If someone kept persuading her, it was estimated that many people would suffer. Furthermore, Boss Li wasn't here right now. The few elders were like God here and no one could resist them. Feng Ling still left. From the moment she stepped out of 11 base, she was no longer a person of this place. She had no right to use any means of transportation here. So she couldn't drive. The only thing she could take away was her shabby suitcase. As for those left in the room, they were just some toiletries and combat clothes. After leaving 11 base, she couldn't wear the combat clothes here anymore. It didn't matter whether she took them or not. Other things would definitely be thrown away and destroyed as soon as possible. Things related to her would probably be shameful in 11 base from now on. She had gone back and forth in front of the gate of 11 base countless times. But there had never been a time like this. When he walked to the door, he looked at the railing below the main door, lifted his foot and stepped over it, then walked straight out. A few minutes later, Feng Ling's figure gradually disappeared in front of the main gate of the base. She stopped but didn't look back. She just stood there for 2 seconds before continuing to walk forward expressionlessly. Kay and the others stood at the gate of the base looking at her back, their eyes red but they couldn't say a word. How could this be? Why did it become like this? Who can find a way to contact Boss? If Boss doesn't come back, Feng Ling will really leave. The elders of the Li family clearly know that Boss has been protecting Feng Ling, so they deliberately drove Feng Ling away when Boss was not here. Today they even gathered so many people here to watch. Now even if Boss can bring Feng Ling back, Feng Ling can't continue to stay here as a man. How can she continue to survive here? Be rational. But what did Feng Ling do wrong? She is not as delicate as a woman at all. Tell me, when did she cheat in training and assessment? When was she not the best one? What's the point of saying this? In Los Angeles there were not many scenes of sleet. However, it snowed today and the temperature was not low enough, so it became sleet. There were not many vehicles around 11 base, and no car dared to casually approach the vicinity. Under normal circumstances, people who wanted to leave 11 base had to drive out by the base's car or other means of transportation sent by the base. But now, Feng Ling admitted that she shouldn't have drunk last night. As long as she didn't drink and didn't lie outside for so long, she wouldn't become like this. Even if she was found to be a woman, at least she wouldn't be lying on the ground and being insulted by others. But now it was too late to say anything. What she shouldn't have done the most was to let Li Nanheng steal her heart so easily. She shouldn't have given all her bottom line to him. Her biggest mistake was to fall in love with Li Nanheng. She just liked him. She didn't know what love was. But what was the pain in her heart that had spread to her limbs and bones since yesterday? Was it just love? If it was just love, how could it hurt to this extent? It turned out that one day she could also learn to love. It turned out that the word love was really like what others said it would hurt. After walking less than a kilometer away from the base, Feng Ling already felt the terrible feeling of collapsing after 15 hours of continuous devil training. Accompanied by a sudden clap of thunder, she raised her head to look at the cloudy sky and the falling snow. It seemed that there was still rain in the snow. The snow was getting heavier and the rain was getting heavier. Feng Ling pushed the suitcase in her hand forward and stepped on the long suburban road ahead, letting the rain and snow slap on her face as if she didn't feel anything. It was rare to see thunder in this season. Chapter 1000. A gust of cold wind blew through the snow and rain. Feng Ling didn't notice that she was trembling, but her body had been trembling. Her legs, which had no strength, were about to lose feeling. The sleet was getting heavier and heavier, and the lightning flashed and the thunder roared as if it were summer, but it was winter. However, the snow was still fine. The rain soaked her clothes and brought the coldness of the snow in. Feng Ling was already exhausted. She looked at the dark clouds in the sky, raised her head and let the cold snow and rain slap her face. Her pale face became paler. After walking for so long, there were no vehicles passing by, as if this road could lead to the end of her life. But what was there to be afraid of? She had no worries. She gradually staggered and her eyes gradually blurred. When she completely lost feeling in her legs, the two suitcases suddenly rolled down the slope in front of the suburban road. Feng Ling's eyes blurred. She wanted to bend down to pull the suitcases back, but she fell headfirst into the cold ground, rolled down several times and finally fell to the side of the road, motionless. 11 base. Kay and the others stood in front of the door for a long time. Seeing the change of the weather, they were more worried about Feng Ling's situation. They wanted to drive out to send her to a safe place. But when they were about to drive out, the door was blocked by several people. Mr. Li said that except for Feng Ling, no other members of the base are allowed to leave today. Otherwise they will bear the consequences. Kay held the steering wheel and couldn't wait to drive the car and knock these people out. But the root of the problem was Mr. Li. Without Mr. Li's order, no one dared to stop them here. This is too much. Fat Tai sat in the back of the car and his eyes were red with anger. How can Feng Ling walk alone in this weather? The people sitting in the car were silent. A few minutes later they got out of the car and rushed back to the base hall in the snow and rain. Looking at the closed door of the hall, they stood in a row and looked at the door quietly. In the base hall, several elders were watching the surveillance footage of the sniper team's training every day. They watched Feng Ling and the other team members together. Suddenly someone came in and said, "Elderly, for members of the sniper team, a member of Team 1, and those people who are usually close to Feng Ling are standing outside in the rain. I don't know what they're trying to do." Feng Ling's expression changed. The elders immediately looked out of the window and saw the tough members of the base standing outside in a row, motionless in the cold snow and rain. Li Junyin's gaze turned cold. What are they doing? Are more than 10 people standing outside to threaten us? How can a little girl who broke the rules of the base be so charming? Ah Feng, who had been sent to the base by the Li family for a long time, was one of the managers in the base hall. Hearing this, he walked to the window, took a look, and then silently looked back at the elders who had been angry because of this matter. Actually, Ah Feng said, if you ignore Feng Ling's gender, she is indeed a very outstanding member of the base. Her usual style is indeed different from what I saw today. She can't hold her liquor well, so she rarely drinks. Even if she occasionally gathers with her friends in the base, she won't drink more than 2 glasses at most. She has good self-awareness. Unfortunately, she's a girl. After saying a few words, Ah Feng suddenly saw the elder's unkind expression and immediately changed the second half of his sentence. He then sighed and smiled. There's nothing we can do. After all, she violated the most basic principle of the base, especially between her and Boss Li. Grandfather Li suddenly slammed his walking stick on the ground and looked at Ah Feng coldly. So you've long seen that Nan Heng is having an affair with this woman in the base? Why didn't you tell me earlier? If Mingzhu hadn't noticed something was wrong, we would have been kept in the dark. If Nan Heng hadn't been guarding the Li family's ancestral hall and couldn't come out, I'm afraid this woman named Feng Ling wouldn't have been able to chase us away. Ah Feng paused. Ah Feng paused. Before this, we really didn't expect that she was a woman. We just thought that she was a slightly good-looking young man. In addition, she has always been excellent in all kinds of tests and is agile. Many tall and strong men can't beat her, which makes it even more difficult for us to doubt her. Moreover, she is in the sniper team and is closer to Boss Li. At first, we didn't think much of it, but later we vaguely felt that Boss Li was indeed taking too much care of her. Combined with the truth today, I said so, but we really didn't find it before. That's enough. Stop twisting words and forcing logic. He's already gone. You can only push all the blame away. Li Junyin turned to look at the people outside and said coldly, if they want to stand, let them stand outside. Which member of the base hasn't been trained in rain and snow? It's fine for them to stand for a few hours. They want to threaten us in this way and demonstrate the rules and customs of the base. Do you think that the 10 of them can change the rules and customs of the base by standing there in the snow and rain for a few hours? What a fantasy. Ah Feng was silent for a moment and didn't say much. He just turned back and said to the people at the door, "Persuade them to go back. It's useless no matter how long they stand. Why bother to let elders Li continue to be angry because of Feng Ling? It's not good for either side. Go and ask them to go back first." "Brother Feng, we've talked to them just now but they won't leave. Their request is not unreasonable. They just hope that you can allow them to drive out now. If I'm not wrong, they should just want to send Feng Ling away. Think about Feng Ling's situation just now. Can he walk so far? If he continues like this, he may die. Brother Feng, we've talked to them just now but they won't leave." Ah Feng frowned and was about to speak when Li Junyan had already approached. He stood by the side and heard their conversation. He said expressionlessly, "Driving the base's car to send a woman who has been cheating in the base for 4 or 5 years. Let's see who dares to go." Elder Li, Grandfather Li immediately glanced at the person who was about to speak indifferently, and the other party immediately shut his mouth and did not dare to say another word. Ah Feng sighed. He had been in the Li family for so long and knew how difficult it was to persuade the stubborn elders of the Li family. He also knew that what the Li family cared about was not because Feng Ling was a woman, but because when Feng Mingzhu reported Feng Ling to them, they found out that Feng Ling had lived in Li Nanheng's apartment for a long time. They often went in and out of the apartment together at night. This was the real reason why they wanted Feng Ling to leave the base. It was a pity that Feng Ling was such a good seedling. He was clearly the best member of the sniper team. Chapter 1001. The Li Family, the Ancestral Hall. The Ancestral Hall was peaceful and quiet, and Li Nanheng hadn't experienced such a quiet and idle feeling for a long time. He had promised the Feng family that after marrying the second miss, he would bring the second miss to the Ancestral Hall of the Li family and become the granddaughter-in-law of the Li family. 3 days after the marriage, he would accompany the little girl who died in the sea at the age of 1 in the Ancestral Hall. Before, he had never learned too much about the second miss of the Feng family. It was not until the day before he got married that he learned everything from Grandma Feng. She died innocently in the sea at the age of 1. She was indeed a pitiful child. It could be imagined how adorable the second miss of the Feng family was when she was 1 year old. Even after 17 years, the entire Feng family had not forgotten her and refused to forget her. Li Nanheng sat on the straw mat in the Ancestral Hall and looked at the 2 baby clothes brought over by the Feng family. They were pink and small. Although they were carefully put away, they were still a little yellow because of the accumulation of years. Before he married the second miss, he had never considered the situation of others, whether it was children, adults, women, or girls. Everything had nothing to do with him. Perhaps it was only because of the sudden pressure of responsibility that he felt for a child who had passed away at the age of 1. He actually had such an inexplicable compassion for a child who had passed away at the age of 1. For such a child, it was rare for him to calm down and be a vegetarian for 3 days in the Ancestral Hall of the Li family, which he had been too lazy to enter since he was a child. He could also not touch his mobile phone or any electronic products and just accompany this little girl who had no fate with the world. Li Nanheng got up, stood beside the 2 little clothes, picked up the fruit plate next to him, stood there and slowly peeled an apple. Then he cut it into small pieces that could only fit a baby's mouth and put them on the plate. Then he stared at the apple pieces on the plate and suddenly sighed with a smile. He didn't know whether a 1-year-old child could eat apples. Maybe she could eat it, maybe she couldn't eat it. Or should he mash it into mud? What on earth could a child eat? Just when Li Nanheng stood there pondering whether to put 2 bottles of milk here, someone came in from outside. It was Li Jin's, the granddaughter of the 3rd elder of the Li family. Big brother. Before Li Jin's entered the door, he glanced outside and then walked into the Ancestral Hall of the Li family. Li Nanheng stood still and looked back at her. Yes. Li Jin's walked in and pulled up the bottom of her long blouse. Then she took out a black cell phone from the back pocket of her jeans and handed it to him. Seeing that she had brought his cell phone, Li Nanheng frowned and suddenly smiled. I didn't dote on you for nothing. You even stole my cell phone for me. After Li Jin's handed the phone to him, he took a step back in case the surveillance cameras in the Ancestral Hall would capture too much content and attract the attention of the elders. He just walked around the Ancestral Hall casually and said disapprovingly, This Ancestral Hall has existed for many years. Although there are many Chinese in Los Angeles, only the Li family can set up an Ancestral Hall at home. The elders of our family are really stubborn. Why do they still have an Ancestral Hall in this era? One is stubborn and all 4 of them are stubborn. They are really brothers. Li Nanheng didn't care. He pressed the power button and said lightly, There's nothing wrong with continuing the Ancestral Hall. We young people are not interested in it. Although the four of them are old, they also have their own things. It's rare to hear you understand them so well. Li Jin's turned to look at him. Your marriage is really strange. What were you thinking at the beginning? Why didn't you marry Feng Mingzhu, a beautiful woman? Why did you marry a child who died at the age of 1? Do you want to bring all kinds of toys to her as a greeting gift? Li Nanhing didn't answer but looked down at the cell phone with a black screen. Before you sent the cell phone to me, didn't you think of charging it for me or bringing the charger with it? Ah, I forgot. Seeing the cell phone in his hand was not turned on, Li Jins walked over in surprise, picked it up and looked at it, saying, "But you can't blame me. If your cell phone hadn't been vibrating in the drawer, I wouldn't have heard it and wouldn't have taken it out. Those calls seem to be from the people of 11 base, and many of the numbers are prefixes of the members of 11 base. Let me tell you, you'd better be content. The 4 elders suddenly went out this morning. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had the chance to steal the cell phone for you." Li Nanhing took a look at her. All 4 of them went out? Yes, I don't know what happened to the grandpas recently. Just a few days before your wedding, Miss Feng, that is, Feng Mingzhu, came to the Li family several times, but I don't know what she said to the grandpas, but I can see that they are not in a good mood recently, especially when they look at you sometimes. Haven't you noticed? They seem to be very dissatisfied with something, so I know they will definitely try their best to trick you. Sure enough, I guessed right. Not only did they marry the cenotaph, but they also made you stay here for 3 days and can't use your cell phone. This is really unreasonable. Li Nanheng. Yes, you are the smartest. I'll send you the charger in a while. I just came back from the Li family today. Speaking of the Li family's company, I finally know why you are too lazy to take over it. There are so many things to do that you don't even have time to relax. If I were you, I would rather live a more exciting life in 11 base than deal with those cunning foxes in the business circle. Li Nanheng snorted and casually turned the cell phone in his hand. Don't talk nonsense. Go get the charger. I'll go get it now. What will you give me? I'll ask your sister Li Lin to help you manage the company for a while and let you and your new boyfriend go on vacation around the world for a month. You know, I'm the only one who can ask Li Lin. She won't give face to anyone else. Li Jins raised her eyebrows. Deal. 10 minutes later. Li Jins hurriedly walked into the Li family's ancestral hall and brought him the cell phone charger. Li Nanheng glanced at the 2 small clothes and the fruit plate next to him, walked to the other side, connected the cell phone to the power and finally turned on the cell phone. It's 2019. Happy New Year, dear. This is the first time we celebrate the new year together. Chapter 1002. Within a minute after the phone was turned on, countless text messages popped up. Before Li Nanheng had time to see where these text messages came from, his eyes were fixed on one of them. Boss, answer the phone. Something happened to Feng Ling. Li Nanheng's eyes paused on those words. He didn't pay attention to any of the messages that passed by. He slid open the phone screen and was about to call the base. However, before he dialed the number, Kay called him. Kay didn't expect that Boss would suddenly turn on the phone. At the moment when the phone was connected, he almost burst into tears. Boss, when can you come back? Come back to find Feng Ling. She was driven out of the base by the 4 elders. Driven out of the base? What do you mean? Li Nanheng's eyes suddenly turned cold, and some bad premonition clearly and obviously surged in his heart. I don't know who reported Feng Ling's gender to the elders, but the elders suddenly came to the base today and asked people to carry all of Feng Ling's things out and throw them all over the ground. The things she used to cover herself and some things that only girls could use were seen by everyone. Kay said anxiously, also Feng Ling knows about your marriage. Last night she must have drunk a lot of wine alone, but I don't know why she has a fever. When I touched her hand I felt that it was very hot, but boss, you know Feng Ling's temper. If she wants to leave, none of us can stop her. It's raining and snowing outside. It's very cold. She can't go far if she goes out alone with her suitcase. Now the gate of the base has been locked down and we can't get out. I don't know how Feng Ling is now, but when we looked at her before, I felt that she was in a bad state. Kay said anxiously, also Feng Ling knows about your marriage. Last night she drank a lot of wine alone, but I don't know why she has a fever. Li Nanheng suddenly turned his eyes to Li Jins, who was standing next to him. She just said that the elders suddenly went out together this morning. It turned out that this was what they planned to do when they forced him to stay in the ancestral hall for 3 days. Li Nanheng put down his cell phone and turned to walk out without saying a word. Hey, what are you going to do? Li Jins looked at him in surprise. Didn't we agree to stay here for 3 days? If you go out now, Grandpa will. However, the man seemed not to hear her and walked out quickly without looking back. Li Jins felt strange and didn't know what happened. She could only feel that Li Nanheng's expression was murderous. She quickly followed him out, only to see that Li Nanheng went to the parking lot in the front yard of the Li's house, opened the door and got in the car. The black Hummer immediately drove out with a terrible engine sound, raising a cloud of dust on the ground. Los Angeles, Chingla Villa. The short-haired girl on the bed had been unconscious for a few hours. The spot on the back of her hand where the needle was inserted had turned blue. She was still in a deep sleep and had not woken up yet. She frowned because of the headache and cold feeling all over her body, turned to look at the woman on the bed and said hoarsely, "Miss Wen?" She frowned faintly because of the headache and the alternating hot and cold feeling all over her body. She turned to look at the woman beside the bed and said hoarsely, "Miss Wen?" When Liqing looked at her by the bed. Seeing her wake up, she smiled. "Do you feel better?" Feng Ling looked at her for a while, looked around and finally slowly raised her hand, put it on the back of her hand and asked softly, "Where am I? Why are you here?" "It's rare for me to take a vacation in the hospital. I wanted to go to 11 base to find my brother, but I didn't expect to see you lying on the ground on the way." When Liqing said as she sat down on the bed, grabbed her hand and touched it. "It's still very hot. How did you become like this? When I picked you up and brought you back to the car, your body was so hot that an egg could be cooked. There's also a strong smell of alcohol on your body, and there are skin wounds on your arms and legs. What happened? Why did you faint on the way?" Hearing the words 11 base, the confusion in Feng Ling's eyes instantly turned cold. She closed her eyes and was about to take her hand out of her hand, when Liqing held her hand and said, "I know you are very weak and need to rest now. This is my residence. I often lived here when I was very young. Except for 2 servants, no one will come here. You can rest here." Feng Ling didn't want to trouble others, but it seemed impossible for her to show off now, so she could only say, "Thank you, Miss Wen." When Liqing raised her eyebrows and looked at her as if she couldn't cheer up no matter what she said. "Feng Ling, are you still not willing to tell me the truth?" "What truth?" "When I brought you back, your clothes were cold and wet. I just wanted to help you change your clothes, but..." When she said this, she pointed to the door of the bathroom. Feng Ling turned around and saw that her dirty clothes and chest wrapping cloth were stacked on the shelf. The fact that she was a woman had been spread in 11 base today. After leaving the base, she really had nothing to hide. She nodded lightly. "Yes, I'm a woman." Seeing her suddenly being so frank, when Liqing looked at her in surprise. "How old are you? You are so young, but you pretended to be a man and lived in 11 base, and 11 base is so strict. How on earth did you do it? I heard they said that you are a very powerful man in the base, but you are a girl. It's really admirable." Feng Ling didn't expect that when Liqing would praise the shameless thing that the Li brothers had just said to her as too admirable. She slowly raised her eyes and looked at Wen Liqing, who looked gentle and fair with long soft hair, and looked very kind when she smiled. She remembered that every time when Liqing went to 11 base, it seemed that she was for Dr. Wen. She didn't know much about the relationship between men and women, or the relationship between brother and sister. Although she didn't know what was going on, she knew that if she were a man, she would definitely like a woman like Wen Liqing. Not like herself, who had no character, no background, no sense of existence and no femininity. "I'm sorry I deceived all of you," Feng Ling said softly. Wen Liqing smiled. "I believe you, but you don't have to apologize. Do you think I didn't see the little ambiguous relationship between you and Li Nanheng when I was in the base? Although Nanheng didn't say anything, I can see that the relationship between you two is not so simple." Chapter 1003. Feng Ling didn't answer her but just looked at the back of her hand again. Wen Liqing didn't know that she just didn't want to mention Li Nanheng. She patted the back of her hand gently. "Your fever was too serious. I was afraid that it would be too late to feed you medicine, so I gave you an injection. In fact, in the United States, if it's not a particularly serious disease, we don't advocate injections. I can see how high your fever was." With that, Wen Liqing said, "The temperature I measured just now is still a little hot, but at least it won't burn you. Just stay here and take a good rest. If you have anything to say to 11 base, I'll help you pass a message to them." "There's nothing to say. I don't belong to 11 base anymore," Feng Ling said in a low voice. Wen Liqing didn't understand what she meant, and then she thought of Feng Ling's suitcase and her lying on the side of the road in embarrassment. She looked at her in surprise. "You, 11 base doesn't accept women." "My secret has been discovered," Feng Ling answered concisely. "So what? Does it matter if you are a man or a woman? You are a good member of the base. Many men are not as good as you. Why do they? Wen Liqing's face was full of displeasure. I'll call my brother and ask him what happened. Even if someone wants you to leave, will Li Nanheng agree to let you go? Feng Ling closed her eyes and didn't answer. Seeing that she didn't speak and her face was so bad, Wen Liqing didn't ask any more and raised her hand to help her pull up the quilt. Okay, let's talk about it when you are better. It's raining and snowing heavily today and it's cold now. I guess the road back to 11 base is deserted and will be frozen. Even if I take you back now, we can't drive back. The icy road is too dangerous. Have a good sleep first. As I said, there are no outsiders here. You don't have to feel any pressure. Just rest. Feng Ling closed her eyes and nodded slightly. Okay. Wen Liqing got up from the bed, closed the window and turned to walk out of the room. The room returned to silence. Feng Ling opened her eyes and looked at the elegant room. She looked at the crystal lights on the beautiful ceiling for a long time and then slowly closed her eyes. With a bang, the door of the base hall was suddenly kicked open. Hearing the noise, Ah Feng suddenly walked out from behind. As soon as he came out, he saw Li Nanheng, who was supposed to be in the ancestral hall of the Li family, walking in with a cold expression. Nanheng. Seeing his expression, he knew that he knew everything. Calm down. Where is Feng Ling? Li Nanheng drove all the way in, slammed the car door and entered the base hall. He looked around but didn't see the elders and his face became colder. I'm not here. Did you drive her away? It's not what you think. The elders received a report and suspected that Feng Ling is a woman. Today they came to the base to investigate, but they didn't expect that Feng Ling was not in a good state last night. This morning she didn't have the strength to fight against us, so she was brought here and threw out all her things. When she was interrogated, she admitted it herself. Where are the elders? Li Nanheng couldn't imagine the scene of Feng Ling being brought out, thrown on the ground and criticized by everyone. He clenched his fists and his knuckles had turned white. In the sniper team. They said they will throw away all the things in the room where Feng Ling lived and lock the door completely. Li Nanheng turned and walked out and Ah Feng followed him out. Nanheng, the elders are angry. I know you are very angry now, but at this time the key is not what the elders think but how Feng Ling will live. Now even if you can bring her back to the base, I'm afraid she will not come back. Li Nanheng's footsteps suddenly stopped. Kay said that Feng Ling had already known the news of his marriage. Feng Ling drank a lot of wine the night before. Feng Ling was driven out of the base by the Li family. Feng Ling was gone. Feng Ling, Feng Ling, Feng Ling. In his life, Li Nanheng had never been so entangled in his heart because of a person's name. He had never felt such pain as though he was being torn apart. He knew Feng Ling's temper very well. If she knew that he was married, she would not forgive him no matter what the reason was. Her temper was never easy for him to control. Once she was hurt and out of his control, he would never be able to have her again. Li Nanheng walked out of the base hall with a sullen face and went straight to the sniper team. When he arrived at the sniper team, the new drill master saw him and was about to come up to speak to him in surprise, but Li Nanheng walked in expressionlessly and went straight into the building where he and Feng Ling lived. He quickly walked to the floor where he and Feng Ling lived and sure enough he saw several members holding a few wooden boards outside Feng Ling's room. It seemed that it was not enough to lock the door and they even wanted to seal it with wooden boards. What was this? Did they treat Feng Ling as a plague that was driven out? After she left they still wanted to seal everything related to her. What are you doing? The man's cold voice suddenly came. The two people who were about to nail the wooden boards on the door looked back and saw him. They were so scared that they hurriedly put the boards on the ground, turned to him and bowed. Boss, Mr. Li asked us to do this. It has nothing to do with me. Li Nanheng kicked the wooden boards on the ground away and then raised his foot and kicked the two people aside. Get out. Mr. Li had just given them an order and was not here. Now it was Boss Li standing here. The two people didn't dare to say anything. They were so scared that they peed their pants and walked out, not daring to look back. Li Nanheng stepped forward to open the door, only to find that the door was indeed locked. It was not that he couldn't break in. He could just kick the door open, but thinking that Feng Ling would come back sooner or later, he couldn't welcome her with a broken door, so he turned into his room with a cold face, opened the window and jumped over from the balcony. As soon as he got over, he saw an empty bottle of wine on the balcony. Looking at the bottle of wine, Li Nanheng's movements paused for a moment, and he bent down to pick up the bottle, only to see that it was a whole bottle of 58% brandy. This degree of brandy was already considered a strong liquor. She was not a good drinker and didn't even know how to drink. But she sat on the balcony alone and drank a whole bottle. Chapter 1004. The man clenched the empty bottle in his hand so tightly that it almost broke in his palm. At this moment his cell phone rang and Li Nanhing picked it up. "Boss, didn't you find Feng Ling when you returned to the base? After talking to you on the phone we finally came out but we couldn't find Feng Ling. With her condition today she can't walk that far. It's at least 20 kilometers from the base to a place where she can get a taxi. She has a high fever and it's snowing so heavily. It's impossible for her to walk out. Boss, when you returned to the base earlier, you didn't find Feng Ling either, right?" Li Nanhing took the bottle into the window, looked at the mess on the ground and said coldly, "Keep looking. Contact the Los Angeles Transportation Bureau and get the surveillance videos along the way and all the roads leading to the city." Okay. With boss's words, Kay was relieved. After hanging up the phone, he hurriedly went to contact someone. Li Nanhing put down his cell phone and walked into the bathroom, only to see that the bottles inside had been broken. Everything was either thrown away, dirted, or smashed. Nothing was left. Just like the little Feng Ling he had been carefully holding in his hand, she was suddenly thrown into hell from a high place within one day. He didn't even come back to save her in time. From dark to dawn, Li Nanhing walked out of the room and saw his grandfather, Li Junyan, who had been standing in the corridor with a walking stick. Looking at the blue stubble around Li Nanhing's chin and the fact that he had been sitting in the room all night, Li Junyan was furious. When he walked over expressionlessly, he raised his cane and hit him hard on the back. "Didn't I ask you to guard the cenotaph of second Miss Feng in the ancestral hall? Who allowed you to come out? You heartless, unjust, and unfilial thing, you really don't take my words seriously for a woman, do you?" Li Nanhing didn't seem to feel any pain. Although he was hit on the back, his expression didn't change and he didn't even frown. He just glanced at him coldly. "If it weren't for the accident in the base, do you think I wouldn't have stayed in the ancestral hall for 3 days? Even if I'm heartless and unfilial, I've never denied what I promised, including the cenotaph that I promised to marry second Miss Feng. Even if I was unwilling, I still married her. If it weren't for the changes in the base, I would still be in the ancestral hall, not here. How dare you King argue with me? You know that Feng Ling is a woman, but you keep the secret and don't tell anyone. This is heartless. You don't respect a base member who has been by your side for many years and even like her. This is unjust. You know that the Li family has always hated women, and you know that I can't let you marry someone like Feng Ling, but you hide such a woman in the base and hold her in the palm of your hand every day. This is unfilial. I didn't directly blame you, but I just drove that woman out, but you left the little wife in the ancestral hall and came to find Feng Ling. Do you think I will give you a chance to see her again? I tell you, Nanhing, don't even think about it in this life. Feng Ling can't marry our Li family even after 3 years. You'd better give up as soon as possible. And let me tell you, I plan to give full control of 11 base to Ah Feng. You'd better go back and take over the Li family. No matter how smart Li Jins and Li Lin are, they are still not half as smart as you. You still put all your attention on the base, but you still made the Li family rise steadily. If you can focus on the Li family business, then the Li family, I won't go back. Give up." Li Nanhing's face was cold as he threw down the words and left. Mr. Li's face instantly turned livid, and he suddenly turned his eyes to Li Nanhing's cold back. Although Li Nanhing usually didn't completely listen to the arrangements of the elders at home, at least he was just a little unruly and a little naughty, and would never refuse in such a ruthless tone. She was just a tomboy who was not even 18 years old. Why did he care so much about her? Mr. Li angrily hit his crutch hard on the ground. Nanhing stopped. However, the man who had gone far had no intention of stopping. "Li Nanhing, are you going to sever ties with our Li family because of that tomboy named Feng Ling?" Li Nanhing's footsteps slowed down a little, and then he stopped, and then in less than 2 seconds without any response he walked out. Mr. Li was so angry that his hand holding the crutch was trembling. This bastard. It was just dawn and Kay and the others had already rushed back. Seeing Boss Li driving out, they hurriedly stopped the car, rolled down the window and said, "Boss, only the road in the suburbs has surveillance cameras and there are no surveillance cameras on other roads. We checked all the surveillance cameras all night, but there is no trace of Feng Ling. Have you checked other roads? It's very dark. I drove around but didn't find her." Kay frowned. Li Nanhing didn't speak anymore, stepped hard on the accelerator, and drove the black Hummer out of the base. Outside the base, Li Nanhing dialed Feng Ling's cell phone number in the car and drove the car to all the roads she could pass. The car drove to the left side of the community leading to the urban area, but there was no trace of Feng Ling. Her number had been dialed countless times, but her phone was always turned off. Where else could she go except to the urban area to find a place to settle down for the time being? There was not even a jungle nearby. She had lived outside for so many years. Even if she grew up in the jungle, it was impossible for her to go back to the jungle. It was impossible for her to adapt to that kind of life. Li Nanheng turned the car around and drove to the urban area with a gloomy face. The Li family. Qin Qiu and Mrs. Li got out of the car in front of the Li family, and Qin Qiu said unhappily when she got out of the car behind them, "Since you've already married my sister's cenotaph, what are you thinking about? This is only the third day of the nominal marriage and you want to come and see it? It's just the clothes of two babies. At most, they will be placed in the ancestral hall. What else can you do? Do you have to be so worried?" Qin Qiu didn't speak but just glanced at Mrs. Li. Mrs. Li also didn't speak. A few days ago she found that the round jade bracelet she had been carrying with her all year round was missing, and she was upset for a long time. After Li Nanheng married Li Nanheng, she felt even more uneasy, so she just wanted to come and see it. Li Jins happened to come out at this time. Seeing them, she came up and said politely, "Mrs. Feng, Mrs. Li, Miss Feng, are you here to see Mr. Li?" "Is Nanheng here?" Qin Qiu asked. "He should have gone to the base." Mrs. Li frowned. "He went to the base as soon as he got married? Didn't he say that he would stay in the ancestral hall for a few days?" Feng Mingzhu sneered. "I guess he suddenly found that the person named Feng Ling in their base is actually a woman. The news that a woman has been disguised as a man in the base for too long has caused a sensation, so he must go back to deal with it." Li Jins didn't know much about the situation, but was surprised to hear this. Mrs. Li and Qin Qiu's expressions instantly trembled. The two of them suddenly turned to look at Feng Mingzhu. Feng Ling was a woman? Chapter 1005. "Mingzhu, what did you just say? That young man named Feng Ling is a woman?" Qin Qiu looked at her in surprise. Feng Mingzhu could understand her mother's surprise, but she didn't understand why her mother looked so surprised. She just glanced at her mother. "She's a woman. I don't know why she disguised as a man to sneak into 11 base. I guess she's born to like places with more men." Qin Qiu's eyes trembled and Feng Ling's face, which was exactly the same as hers when she was young, flashed in her mind, and then she turned to look at her mother. Madame Dowager pressed her hand on Qin Qiu's arm. After a long silence she said, "Let's go to the ancestral hall and have a look." Everything could only be guessed and the age didn't seem to match. What if her hope was dashed again? In the few years after second brother fell into the sea, the Feng family went to many orphanages. Anyone who looked like second brother was thought to be a miracle. They thought it was that poor child, but time and time again they all failed. Second brother had been gone for 17 years. If Feng Ling, who claimed to be 17 years old, was really second brother, she should be 18 years old. If the age didn't match, no matter how many coincidences there were, it was useless. But that child really looked like second brother. If she was a girl, it would be even better. Madame Dowager and Qin Qiu knew each other well. There were many things that couldn't be said before they were confirmed. "Madame Dowager, Mrs. Feng, they are not here today. Let's go to the ancestral hall in a few days. The ceremony has just been held. It's too early for you to come." Li Jins didn't know what happened, so it was not convenient for the Feng family to go in at this time. In particular, Miss Feng Mingzhu seemed to be unhappy about something. Listening to their words, there should be some strange dispute. Of course, the Li family would never get involved in these disputes, so the best way was to stay away from them and not let them get close. "We're just going to take a look at second brother's cenotaph," the old madam said softly. "Madam, the clothes second miss left behind are not just these 2 years. You've only brought 2 of them here and kept the rest with you. It's only been 2 years and you've only left for 2 or 3 days. Do you really have to enter the Li family's ancestral hall? Madam, after all, you're from the same generation as the Li family's grandfathers. You should know that people who are not members of the Li family are not allowed to enter the ancestral hall. Besides, the Li family's patriarchal ideology has always been very serious. Even I, the granddaughter of third Master Li, have to repeatedly request and perform a ceremony to enter the ancestral hall. You, Mrs. Feng and Miss Feng, this is not appropriate." Madame Dowager frowned but didn't insist on walking inside. "Forget it. Since the Li family has so many rules, I won't break them." "When will Nanheng come back?" "I'm not sure. If you guys are too anxious, I'll give him a call now. But when I called him just now, he didn't answer." "Then don't bother looking for him. Now that he has returned to the base, there must be something important." Madame Dowager skipped the topic about Feng Ling in the base, winked at Qin Qiu and turned back to the car. Feng Mingzhu turned to look at the front door of the Li family's villa. She thought that she should have married into this place openly, but in the end she still missed everything she wanted. She lowered her eyes, didn't say anything more, and got into the car. Seeing that the Feng family's car had left, Li Jin slowly breathed out. Really, they all suddenly left in one day, leaving her to clean up the mess at home. All the roads in the suburbs of Los Angeles were seriously frozen. Even the best driver couldn't completely control the stability of the car on such an uncontrolled icy road. The tires of the black Hummer were very stable, but they still skidded on the ice countless times. The car drove very fast, and on the road to the city the car drifted because of the speed. Seeing that the car was out of control, Li Nanheng looked at the empty road ahead and the surrounding deserted fields, and his hands left the steering wheel. In the end, with a bang, the tall black Hummer hit the roadside fence, broke through the fence and stopped hard in the barren field, and then the engine went out with a puff. Li Nanheng's chest was hit hard by the steering wheel, but he didn't even frown. When the car stopped, he sat silently in the driver's seat, looking at everything outside. His eyes were empty, and he slowly raised his hand hanging on his thigh, only to catch a mass of air. Last night he sat in Feng Ling's room all night. He wanted to feel her temperature but couldn't. Only then did he realize that she hadn't left anything behind for so long. Once she disappeared, even if he had the ability, he might not be able to find her. Qingla Villa. After 2 days of rest, Feng Ling just caught a cold, had a fever and had a hangover. After the fever subsided, she was fine and could get out of bed and walk around. Wen Liqing did give her a good rest space. Except for checking her body and eating time, she let her rest alone in the room most of the time. Feng Ling felt much better today. She went to take a simple shower, put on a set of light-colored sportswear given to her by Wen Liqing, and went to open her 2 suitcases. Most of the things in the suitcases could no longer be used or worn. After all, she walked outside in the sleet, and even the best suitcases had been soaked in water. Because the people here were very polite and wouldn't casually rummage through her things, the things in the suitcases were soaked in water for more than 2 days and could no longer be used. She packed up the things inside and prepared to throw them away, and noticed that her cell phone had been placed in this ball of clothes for a long time. Li Nanheng accompanied her to buy the cell phone, and it had been used for a long time. Once he offered to help her change it again, but she refused. At that time she inexplicably liked the things he chose for her. She didn't know what kind of emotion it was. She liked it, was reluctant to throw it away and wanted to keep using it. Today she finally understood what kind of emotion it was. So, there was no need to keep this cell phone. The girl squatting by the suitcases did not hesitate to throw the cell phone into the trash can, including all the other things that could no longer be worn or used, and threw them out. Chapter 1006. At the bottom of the other suitcase there was something. Feng Ling was about to put the suitcase away when she suddenly remembered the thing there. She pulled open the curtain at the bottom and took out the jade pendant that had been placed inside. She had been wearing this jade pendant since she was a child. She could throw other things away but not this one. She sat on the ground for a while and thought of the jade bracelet she picked up at the banquet last time, but she didn't have time to pay much attention to it after returning to the base. It seemed that she had stuffed it into the suitcase after coming back. Which suitcase? At that time, outside the base hall, all the things that fell on the ground were picked up, and nothing was left, so it couldn't be lost. She reached out to the trash can and took out all the clothes that had been thrown away. She looked through them one by one until the round jade bracelet fell out of the pocket of one of the clothes. Feng Ling held the jade pendant in one hand and the jade bracelet in the other. She looked at them for a while, then overlapped the 2 things in front of her eyes and finally stuck them together. She pressed her fingers gently. The jade pendant and the jade bracelet fit perfectly in the middle of the jade bracelet as if they were one. Looking at the 2 things that suddenly merged into one in her hands, Feng Ling, who was squatting by the trash can, suddenly sat on the ground. At this time, the old lady's excited expression every time she looked at her, and Mrs. Feng Qinqiu occasionally fell into a trance when she looked at her. She didn't know much about the Feng family. She always thought that the Feng family only had one daughter, Feng Mingzhu, but she seemed to forget when it was. From the conversation between the mother and daughter, it seemed that Qinqiu had been thinking about another daughter who had died. Thinking of this, her mind suddenly became clear. At that time, the old lady and Qinqiu stared at her face, asked her if she was a man or a woman, and asked her age. After hearing that she was a man, the 2 of them were disappointed, and when they heard her age they were even more disappointed. But her gender was fake and she was not sure about her age. Could she be the daughter that the Feng family thought was dead? But no matter whether she was or not, the only living member of the Feng family was Feng Mingzhu. She was the eldest daughter of the Feng family. Li Nanheng would only marry Feng Mingzhu. What did this have to do with her own identity? If she could be the daughter of the Feng family just because of this pair of jade pendants, did it mean that when she saw Li Nanheng again she would have to call him brother-in-law? How ridiculous. Feng Ling indifferently put the jade pendant in her hand back into the suitcase. Facing the possibility that her identity was about to be revealed, and the so-called dead daughter they mentioned, it meant that she was not abandoned, but something must have happened. However, she realized that at this moment she actually didn't want to pursue the truth of her origins, and she didn't want to find her parents or her family. So what if she is? Moreover, Feng Mingzhu had always hated her. If she really appeared with the jade pendant, it would not be just one family that would be unhappy. A child raised by a wolf would never be welcomed anywhere. There was no trace of Feng Ling. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. It was indeed difficult to find a person who had never contacted anyone outside. After she left, she didn't turn on her cell phone again, couldn't find the location of GS, and didn't use the money in her bank card. No one knew where she had appeared. Kay even contacted Xiao Fei and asked if he knew where Feng Ling had been recently, because Feng Ling didn't know anyone outside. But obviously the result was the same. No one knew where she was. Li Nanheng's car was found in the wilderness that day, and then he sat in the car for a day and a night. The next day, the members of the base who came out to look for him found that Boss Li was unconscious in the car and rushed him to the hospital. Only then did they know that Li Nanheng hadn't eaten much since the day Li Nanheng got married. In the 2 days in the ancestral hall, he didn't eat anything. Because of Feng Ling's matter, he drove day and night without sleep, and the impact force when the car suddenly stopped in the wilderness and the air conditioning in the car was not turned on all night, so Li Nanheng was unconscious in the car for a long time. Logically speaking, Xiao Fei had already left the base and could no longer have any contact with the base, but he still drove back to the base because of Feng Ling's matter. He wanted to settle the score with Li Nanheng, but when he found Li Nanheng, he was still unconscious in the hospital, so he couldn't punch him. He just threw the English newspaper with the Feng and Li family's wedding on his bed and turned to leave with a cold face. Only when Liqing knew that Feng Ling had left. But she promised Feng Ling that she wouldn't say anything. If Li Nanheng was not married, maybe she would be the peacemaker and help him secretly pass the message. But the fact was just as Feng Ling left before she left. Li Nanheng was married. From the perspective of reason and emotion, there was no reason to disturb his life, and he was not qualified to disturb her future life. They were strangers in the future and there was no need to meet again. When Feng Ling left, she left her card with more than $300,000 in deposit with Wen Liqing and then took 50,000 yuan in cash from Wen Liqing's hand. This way she didn't want them to find out where she had withdrawn the money. And her expenses were not big. This money was enough for her to live a good life, find a stable job, and stay away from everything in Los Angeles. Wen Liqing certainly wouldn't touch the card Feng Ling left, even if Feng Ling said she could use the money in it at any time. But Wen Liqing was not short of money. She could feel Feng Ling's sincerity, so she liked Feng Ling very much. She liked Feng Ling's sincerity when her feelings were strong and her decisiveness when her feelings were fading away. She couldn't see people she shouldn't see, and she couldn't think about people she shouldn't think about. If she could understand this matter one day earlier, there wouldn't be those disputes and stories between her and her brother, and she wouldn't be so persistent. Feng Ling said that she especially envied a beautiful and gentle female doctor like her, who had a good family background and excellent educational background, a good upbringing and was gentle and kind to others. In fact, what Feng Ling didn't know was that people like Wen Liqing envied her decisiveness and freedom. In life, people who seemed to have everything on the surface, but what they had would become a burden that couldn't be abandoned in the future. No one's hope could be let down. But Feng Ling was different. The only thing she had to do was not to let herself down. Chapter 1007. 2 years later. In the Chinese Martial Arts Hall on the first floor opposite the Polytechnic University in Boston, USA. Big news. This year's National Close Combat Women's Champion is a contestant named Zero. She wears a fighting cap all the time so we can't see her face. But look at her figure. She is obviously our cold-faced female coach. Let me see. Oh my god, isn't our coach called Ling? Isn't she the code name Zero? Is there even a need to look at the name? Look at the devilish figure in the tight-fitting black combat suit, and then think about the cold-faced beauty who is obviously beautiful but always keeps a straight face. They are completely the same person, right? My god, our coach is the National Close Combat Champion in the United States. It's the women's team. What's wrong with the women's team? You haven't seen the video of the competition. The men's team is not as energetic as the women's team. Besides, with Coach Ling's skills and coldness, she can beat 10 men in front of her. She doesn't care about men or women as long as she is our coach. Several trainees were sitting in the classroom and discussing. Suddenly they heard a cold female voice. It's 3 o'clock. If you don't, get out and make room for the next group of trainees. As soon as the trainees heard the voice, they all looked embarrassed and shivered. Sure enough, it was the champion with the mask in the magazine just now. They immediately found their respective positions with smiles on their faces, and then did the basic training movements in the class. While doing it, they glanced at the expressionless short-haired woman in front of the door from time to time. Coach Ling usually wore very loose and normal clothes, but several times when she appeared in some competition parties with other coaches, she wore a particularly cold black fighting suit, which was mostly tight. No matter how cold the clothes were, Coach Ling looked cold and sexy when she wore them. After all, no one had noticed it before. They didn't expect that she had such a good figure. She was really memorable at first sight. This time, they didn't expect that she actually participated in the national close combat competition at the suggestion of the head coach, and even won the championship. However, she kept a low profile and didn't mention anything. She usually didn't show her real name to others. When she participated in the competition, she even omitted it. She just used a code 0. That was not the main point. The main point was that the female coach they had always admired and worshipped was said to be under 20 years old. She was really too young. These students were all a few years older than her. Most of them had good grades or came from rich families, so they came to the American Institute of Technology to study. On average, they were 2 or 3 years older than her. However, these male students were all suppressed by her indifferent temper. One word from Coach Ling was enough to make them not dare to say a word. Otherwise, she would really hit him. This Chinese martial arts club was not small, but none of the other coaches, male or female, no matter how old they were, could beat her in one-on-one combat. Feng Ling walked past the students and looked at their training postures. She raised one of their arms and patted him hard on the back. What are you doing? Your back is hunched after not training for a few days. Straighten your back. Yes. The male student mischievously dragged out his voice, but when he met the instructor's gaze, he instantly pursed his lips and didn't dare to make a sound. After looking at him coldly for a while, Feng Ling withdrew her gaze and turned to the other side of the students. Her current name was Ah Ling, also known as 0. 0 meant that she had nothing and started over again. After leaving 11 Base 2 years ago, she left Los Angeles. Originally, she wanted to go further and go to other countries, but she found that she had not experienced enough since she was a child. She was used to the United States and other places might not be suitable for her to survive. Later, she coincidentally came to Boston and entered this martial arts club as a coach. It took her half a year to adapt to life here and another year to accept such a peaceful life. Every day she dealt with these international students in their early 20s. Most of them came from good families and were proud and arrogant. They just wanted to find something to learn, but they had too much money to spend, so they had to find some business to kill time. At first, they didn't pay much attention to their studies, but it didn't take long for them to change their temperament. They didn't dare to miss a martial arts class and didn't dare to make trouble during class. When she just walked to a student who had been learning with her for more than a year, the student suddenly turned his head to look at her and asked in a low voice, "Sister Ling, I heard that the champion this time will have a bonus of $500,000. Do you want to treat us to a meal?" Feng Ling paused and suddenly turned to look at him. The student immediately turned his head back in fright and continued to do the standard movements, otherwise he would definitely be beaten. However, he was kicked in the back of his knee. Wrong posture. The student. What did you call me? Feng Ling looked at him coldly. Sister Ling. After being kicked again, the student immediately said with a sad face, Coach Ling. Hearing the noise, the others all held back their laughter. Otherwise, if anyone really laughed out loud, they would definitely be the next one to suffer. Seeing that he was obedient, Feng Ling turned to look at the next person with a cold face. After checking their postures one by one and adjusting them, she walked back to the front, looked back at them for 5 minutes and then said, "How are you doing with the breakdown movement and the whole process of the shoulder throw that I taught you last time? Who thinks you did well? Come and fight with me." The students looked at each other. This was the rhythm of Coach Ling taking the initiative to ask for abuse. The group of people rubbed their palms and were about to step forward, but the one standing in the front was the first to rush up. However, the faster he rushed up, the faster he lost face. He originally thought that he could directly carry such a thin woman on his shoulder and then throw her back to the ground, but all his movements were too loopy. Feng Ling just stretched out her hand casually, and the strength of the other party's hand disappeared. Instead, he overexerted himself and fell back to the ground. While everyone was holding back their laughter, Feng Ling clapped her hands and said calmly, "Next." Another one came up and the result was the same. He wanted to throw the instructor down with brute force, but every time he was the first to fall to the ground. The next one went up and fell even harder. The tall and slender woman clearly had a beautiful face, but her hair was cut short, and she wore such a neutral dress. She wore loose martial arts suit and sportswear every day. She was so thin, but she was so good at martial arts that so many men couldn't beat her. He really wondered where she came from. She was a beautiful and handsome woman. Just watching her fight was a sight to behold. Chapter 1008. Who else wants to fight? I think you're all very confident. Come and have a try. Feng Ling looked at the students who got up from the ground and turned to look at the others. This time the group of people didn't dare to move. After hesitating for a long time, another student came out. Everyone looked at him. It was Chen Beiqing, who always took the opportunity to show his presence in front of the coach. It was said that his family ran a bank in Boston. He was definitely a rich man. He studied business management at Harvard and was about to graduate, but he had been chasing after Drill Master Ling for a whole year. However, this year he was completely ignored by Drill Master Ling. She didn't give him any chance at all. She didn't even agree to treat him to a meal. TSK, is Beiqing asking for a beating? Since it didn't work to treat him to a date, did he want to be beaten until he was half disabled? Feng Ling looked at him calmly and coldly. Classmate Chen, are you sure? Chen Beiqing was 23 years old and studied at Harvard University, which was very close to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston. He had not graduated from his senior year, but had already received a master's degree in business management. He was a very fair and gentle boy, and he had a deeper relationship with Feng Ling than others. The reason was that when Feng Ling first came here to work, Chen Beiqing was kidnapped by a group of gangsters here because of an accident in his family's bank. Feng Ling passed by the parking lot outside Harvard at that time and noticed that those people were sneaking towards the white car. Based on her sensitivity to these gangsters, it was not difficult for her to see what they wanted to do. She recognized the license plate number of the white luxury car. It was the car of Chen Beiqing, who had just come to the martial arts club to learn some kung fu, so she was a little cautious. When those people were about to rob Chen Beiqing's car, she quickly drove past them, stopped the car next to Chen Beiqing's car, rolled down the window and winked at Chen Beiqing, who hadn't noticed the danger. Chen Beiqing saw those people behind through the rearview mirror, immediately backed up with her, accelerated, knocked away those people walking behind the parking lot, and then drove away at a high speed. On the same day, they also launched an extreme car chase on a nearby road. Those gangsters were not so easy to get rid of. Although Chen Beiqing didn't have any kung fu skills, he was good at driving. Under the hint of Feng Ling's eyes, he hesitated at first because he couldn't leave her alone. Later, seeing that she seemed to be fine, he asked her to stop the car in the middle of the road to block those gangsters, and he drove away quickly. They were just a few gangsters, so it was impossible for them to catch up with Feng Ling. When the police and Chen Beiqing arrived, those gangsters had been lying on the ground with bruises all over their faces. They didn't even have time to take out the guns in their pockets before they were thrown aside by Feng Ling. It was just a case of kidnapping and revenge by a rich family. After understanding the situation, the police took the gangsters away. After Chen Beiqing communicated with the police, he looked back and saw that Feng Ling had turned to get into the car and was about to leave, but before she drove away, he suddenly opened the door of the passenger seat and sat in. Feng Ling looked at him strangely. "What's up? Why do you want to help me?" he asked. Feng Ling fastened her seat belt and said calmly, "Didn't you just register at our martial arts club? I have some impression of you, so I helped you when I saw you. It's not a big deal. Are you going to help me or not? Do you know how difficult it is to deal with these people? I'm not familiar with you. If something happens and I don't admit it or take responsibility, what will you do?" Feng Ling sneered. "Little boy, you wouldn't care about this kind of thing if you didn't have full confidence. The dangerous people I've faced are much more ruthless than these gangsters. These people won't hurt me, and I don't need you to take responsibility for me. Get out of the car. I'm going back." Chen Beiqing raised his eyebrows, looked at her, and suddenly smiled. "Little boy? How old are you?" Feng Ling. Although she didn't know how old he was, most of the students who studied in Harvard were over 20 years old. In short, they were all older than her. Feng Ling was expressionless. 25. Chen Beiqing raised his eyebrows. "You don't look like me. Don't worry about it. Get out of the car. I still have something to do. You're out of danger. Go do what you need to do. Seeing that she was getting impatient, Qin Beiqing didn't say more. He just opened the door with a smile and said, I just want to go to the martial arts club to kill time. But now I have changed my mind. From today on, I will go to every class you teach. I will never be absent. Feng Ling ignored him. When he got out of the car, she closed the door and drove away. This matter was just a very small matter to her. She had experienced too many different kinds of fighting scenes. She just casually saved a student, so she didn't take it seriously. However, as he said, Qin Beiqing would definitely come to the 3 classes every week on time. In the first few months, he just came to class on time, but one day he suddenly brought her a bouquet of roses every time he came to class. Feng Ling refused every time, so he simply asked someone to put the flowers on her desk and then came to class without saying a word. As time passed, Feng Ling was used to his stubbornness. Most importantly, he was stubborn under silence. He wouldn't pester her with words, nor would he do anything. It was just a bouquet of flowers. It was to tell everyone that he liked her and that he was pursuing her. However, he wouldn't say or do anything to annoy her, so she kept rejecting him. From the moment the flowers were sent to the table, to the door, and then directly into the trash can, he still delivered them without hesitation. After a long time, she was too lazy to pay attention to him. Anyway, it had nothing to do with her whether the flowers withered or not. Only the cleaning auntie who came to clean the office every day would say excitedly, "Oh, there are new flowers again? Our vases are almost full. The ones from last time are still fresh. It seems that we need to buy 2 more vases." Occasionally he offered to treat her to dinner, but she didn't respond to him. She also didn't respond to him when he invited her to a movie. Feng Ling didn't take it seriously and Qin Beiqing didn't say much. Besides, those were all things outside of class. In class, he was so obedient that she couldn't find fault with him. Her classmate Qin, are you sure? Didn't make Qin Beiqing's expression change too much. He just smiled and stretched out his hand to make a gesture of invitation. Chapter 1009. In an instant, there were whistles all around and everyone was ready to watch the show. They just wanted to see how Qin Beiqing was beaten to the ground by Coach Ling. Feng Ling just glanced at him and took a step back to make room for him. Let's start. Qin Beiqing stepped forward. His movements were clean and neat, which was the standard posture of a good student. He stretched out his long arm and grabbed Feng Ling's arm. Just as Feng Ling was trying to find a loophole in his movements, he suddenly pulled her in front of him. Feng Ling instantly raised her eyes to look at him and was about to push him away when he moved his hand forward and suddenly clasped it on her left shoulder. When her expression suddenly changed, he abruptly lifted her onto his shoulder. Under everyone's shocked gaze, he placed her on his shoulder for about 10 seconds. He deliberately did not let Feng Ling struggle and spun several times on the spot before throwing her back onto the soft cushion on the ground. The cushion was soft, so it didn't matter if she fell down, but at the same time, Qin Beiqing regretted it. Afraid that she would be hurt, he turned back and wanted to pull her up, but Feng Ling kicked him away in anger. Just as they were arguing and tearing each other apart, her movements became unsteady. His movements also became unsteady, and he suddenly fell down, pressing on top of her. Seeing the cold-faced female coach was pushed down on the spot, the surrounding people whistled even more, accompanied by all kinds of exclamations. Qin Beiqing was also taken aback for a moment. This was something he didn't expect. Feng Ling looked at him coldly. Get up. Qin Beiqing looked at her, a little moved and a little apologetic in his eyes. He got up and was about to pull her up, but Feng Ling didn't even look at his hand. She got up and asked coldly, "How do you know I have a wound on my shoulder? You haven't learned anything else, but you've learned to attack people's weaknesses? I noticed that every time I touched your left shoulder, you looked uncomfortable about 8 out of 10 times. Although I'm not sure if it's because of an old injury with my ability as a beginner. If I want to throw you over my shoulder, I can only use your weakness. Although it's a bit despicable, it's still a method of close combat. This is what you said in class. Have you forgotten?" Qin Beiqing looked at her calmly. Feng Ling was speechless and didn't say anything more. She just raised her hand and motioned him to stand back. After this class, the head coach and the person in charge of the martial arts club arranged a celebration party for her to win the National Women's Close Combat Championship. Originally, Feng Ling wore a mask and didn't say her real name. She only reported a code name, but it didn't matter if she was recognized. However, she didn't plan to be high profile. It was just that she didn't have anything to do at that time. Every day she just went to class and rested. Her life seemed to have lost its purpose and she was numb. The head coach saw her situation and asked her if she wanted to try to compete. In the past 2 months she had been preparing for the competition and often trained by herself. Now that she won the championship she didn't know what to do. The so-called celebration banquet was nothing more than a meal and a drink. She couldn't drink as much as usual, but she had been working outside for so long, so she had to drink a few glasses. After everyone had eaten and drank, she declined others who offered to send her home and took a taxi back to her current residence in Boston. She only drank a few glasses of wine in the evening, but she was not drunk. At most, she smelled of alcohol and was slightly tipsy. She walked into a student apartment building between Polytechnic University and Harvard University, got into the elevator, and pressed the number of the 15th floor. This was the place she had rented for the past 2 years. It was a small apartment of about 50 square meters. The environment here was not bad, and because it was rented to international students all year round, the price was relatively not too expensive. The living environment around it was not particularly luxurious. Life here was very peaceful. She got out of the elevator, took the key, opened the door, entered the door, turned on the light, threw down the bag, kicked off the shoes, and then sat on the sofa in a daze for a night. They all said that this was the life of ordinary people. Different from her life in the jungle, there was no excitement, no sense of achievement when searching for food. There was no physical training and devil training every day in 11 base, no sniper rifle, no sweat, and no life and death missions. It seemed that she finally lived like others, but lost her original self. As the night deepened, Feng Ling was not sleepy on the sofa. She got up and took a shower. After coming out, while drying her hair, she sat on the sofa and turned on the TV. She casually dialed a channel and parked it on an entertainment program. She didn't watch the content but only heard the laughter of the audience. In this way the entire quiet room became lively. After drying her hair, she put her hand on her shoulder. This was the place where she was bitten by a snake during the mission in the Snake Valley. Although it was said to be an old wound, it actually didn't hurt anymore. She didn't know why. It didn't hurt at all and she didn't even feel it at all, but as soon as it was touched, her heart seemed to be torn and suddenly hurt fiercely. She felt uncomfortable all over. So inexplicably, it became an instinctive reaction. The place on her shoulder that left a small white cross became her sensitive point and couldn't be touched. It seemed to be a sore spot. At this time the phone on the coffee table rang. Feng Ling brushed her wet hair with her hand, picked it up casually, glanced at the caller ID and picked it up. Feng Ling, I accidentally switched to an American sports channel on TV today and saw an American close combat competition. Are you the champion of the women's group? Wen Liqing's voice came from the phone. Feng Ling paused and didn't explain but asked, how can you be sure that it was me? I'm not completely sure. I just feel that in my limited knowledge I can only think of you as a girl with such great skills and such clean speed. Moreover, that girl's height is about the same as yours. In addition, that code name is Zero. Although this Zero isn't Ling, based on my understanding of you, I feel that this Zero must be you. Feng Ling smiled lightly. There is always someone better. Maybe it really isn't me. Chapter 10:10. Wen Liqing smiled. You don't have to explain to me. It doesn't matter whether it's you or not. Anyway, I won't tell others. In the past 2 years, only I know your cell phone number and only I know how you left. Although you have been unwilling to tell me where you are now, I won't ask much, but Feng Ling, please don't find me annoying. Nanheng has been looking for you crazily for the past 2 years. Hearing this name, the smile in Feng Ling's eyes gradually disappeared. If there's nothing else, I'll hang up first. Feng Ling. Wen Liqing said helplessly, I'm not a lobbyist. I know how miserable you were when you were kicked out of the base. I saw you lying on the roadside with my own eyes, but in the past 2 years, Nanheng has been in the base, and the elders of the Li family are not allowed to enter the base. He hasn't returned to the Li family for 2 years and refused to see the elders. He has really been looking for you. Although I don't know why he married you, I can see that he is not pretending to love you. He must have some difficulties that are hard to explain. Many times, a person's words are not necessarily honest, but if a person doesn't explain himself, it may not be as bad as others say. Maybe there are other reasons. Wen Liqing said helplessly, I'm not a lobbyist. I know how miserable you were when you were kicked out of the base. It's not important, Miss Wen. It's been so long. I've long forgotten about it, Feng Ling said lightly. I'm very grateful to you for keeping my secret and not asking me where I am now. I can only say that I'm living a good life now. My life is peaceful, my work is stable, and everything is good. I don't need to worry about anything. I don't want to get involved with those people and things in the past. As time passes, I and that group of people will forget each other. How could you forget? If you really forget, you won't wear a mask in this kind of competition. You wear a mask because you don't want anyone to recognize you and find you. If you don't want to be found, it means that you haven't forgotten at all. Feng Ling didn't speak anymore and just looked at the audience sitting under the stage who had been laughing, but she seemed to feel nothing and couldn't find anything funny. Miss Wen, I am very grateful for your help back then, but I really want to bid farewell to everything in the past. So, don't mention anything about those people or that person to me anymore. I don't really want to hear it. You should know that if it weren't for the kindness you've shown me, perhaps a cold and heartless person like me might have cut off all contact with you. Of course, I'm not overestimating myself. I'm just expressing my position. Wen Liqing sighed. I understand, but Nanheng has been looking for you for the past 2 years. The work in the hospital is so busy. It's rare for me to be free. Rest early. Good night. Feng Ling hung up the phone. Feng Ling casually used the head coach's card to receive the money. In the past few years, she had never used her real name and borrowed other people's bank cards. The head coach was good to her and wouldn't touch her things. Recently, because of the championship prize, he had been urging her to buy a small house and settle down with the money so that she wouldn't have to rent a house all the time. Feng Ling didn't have any concept of these things. She just wanted to eat well and have a place to live. However, the coaches in the martial arts club all persuaded her like this, so she had to look around. There were no new buildings nearby, and most of them were small apartments suitable for foreign students. She liked a duplex of about 60 square meters near the place where she lived now. Her prize money and the salary she had saved in the past 2 years were just enough for a down payment. It was not a bad idea to buy an apartment that she could decorate to her liking. So she bought it. Because it was not a new building, the original owner of this apartment decorated it in a messy style. She had the whole house demolished and redecorated, so she couldn't live in it for the time being. Considering that she had to live in at least half a year later, she still had to live in the small house she rented. Anyway, she was used to living there, so it didn't matter where she lived. However, although the people around her were happy for her, they all knew her temper and didn't spread it around. Because she wore a mask and they respected her idea of keeping a low profile, they didn't say it to others except for discussing and envying each other. The days passed peacefully. The only exception was Qin Beiqing, who would ask someone to send a bouquet of flowers before each class. Coach Ling, where should I put the flowers today? Directly into the trash can? Or directly into the cleaning auntie's car? A coach passed by outside and happened to sign for the flowers. Then he came in with the flowers with a smile on his face. Feng Ling was sitting at the desk watching the recent simulation courses in the martial arts club. Hearing the noise, she didn't even lift her eyelids. Whatever. Tisk whatever. By the way, that classmate Chin is really good to you. He knows that you never look him in the eye, but he never gives up. He sends you flowers 3 times a week, and each time he sends you flowers. Today it's champagne roses flown in from France. It smells so good. Feng Ling still didn't lift her eyelids and continued to watch the simulation courses on the computer. Seeing that she was as cold and indifferent as ever, the coach tooted and threw the bouquet in his hand to the passing cleaning auntie. After class, Qin Beiqing said that today was his friend's birthday and he needed a female companion. Feng Ling directly refused. Qin Beiqing said regretfully, "If you don't go with me today, I will keep following you until you agree." Feng Ling didn't bother to talk to him. She packed up her things and went home. She drove back to the place where she lived and was about to walk in. Suddenly, she stopped and felt that someone seemed to be following her. She turned around but saw no one. Then she looked at the cars around and coldly picked up the phone to call Qin Beiqing. After the call went through, she was about to ask him if he really dared to follow her. In the end, the other party picked up the phone. She heard the noise in the private room, and it didn't sound like he was tailing her. "Where are you?" Feng Ling asked with a frown. Qin Beiqing smiled on the phone. "What? Do you regret not coming out with me? I'm already drunk. I can't drive to pick you up now. How about I send someone to pick you up?" "No, I won't go." Feng Ling abruptly hung up the phone, lowered her eyes and walked in. As she walked, she kept an eye on the movements behind her. Someone was following her. And this person could not be found by her when she was driving. Obviously he was better than her in all aspects. Who could it be? Qing Qing will go to Shanghai to participate in the Yuewen Super IP Storm Festival in the next few days. There are a lot of activities on the schedule. I may have to ride on the plane. I will try to keep updating regularly. Chapter 10-11. Sensing the presence of the person behind her, Feng Ling did not go home directly but turned into a supermarket nearby. She bought some things in the supermarket and pushed the shopping cart while paying attention to the people behind her and behind the nearby shopping racks from time to time. She strolled back and forth in the supermarket for half an hour. The sky outside was already dark. Feeling that the person didn't seem to be following her, she paid the bill and went out. After walking out of the supermarket, she did not go back immediately. She walked around the parking lot again and looked at all the cars parked there one by one. She had lived here for a year and a half, and she had an impression of every car that was often parked downstairs. Her naturally keen observation skills allowed her to instinctively notice a car that she had never seen before. However, in the past few days she had not seen any unfamiliar people or cars, including just now. There were no people or strange movements. After returning to the car, she sat quietly for another hour. After confirming that the person seemed to have left, she quietly closed the car door and quickly walked into the building where she lived. When she arrived at the floor where she lived, she looked around again and raised her eyes to the corridor security monitoring equipment in the corner of the corridor that was normally lit. After thinking for a while, she entered the door. This situation of being suspected of being followed lasted for about 3 days. Every time when Feng Ling returned home from outside, she felt that someone seemed to be watching her from behind, but she could not find any car or suspicious person. On the 3rd day, she simply turned around and walked to all the places nearby that could hide a person. Whether it was behind a tree, in a corner between buildings, or in a shadow, or in a coffee shop, dessert shop, or a small restaurant downstairs, all kinds of people were there, but they were all eating and shopping normally. It was different from the stares she felt from the people following her. Since she came to Boston, she had not provoked anyone and no one knew who she used to be. She had no enemies. If she really did offend someone, it was probably the gang of gangsters who helped Chen Beiqing back then. However, it had been so long. If they had the ability to take revenge, they definitely wouldn't have waited until a year and a half later. A few days ago, the head coach told her to pay attention to her safety. After all, the black tight suit she wore on the fighting field was too sexy. Not only did she make a lot of money, but her figure was also so good. At that time, it was even broadcasted on TV and many people saw it. Once someone recognized her, it was likely that they would disguise themselves as a lecherous tram and plot against her. Of course, ordinary perverts couldn't beat her. However, the person who was following her was clearly not an ordinary person. To be able to stand outside of all her defenses and cautiousness, and not even a trace of it could be found. Whether it was in martial arts or acuity, he was above her. Inexplicably, a thought suddenly jumped into her mind. Her face suddenly turned cold. She stopped looking and turned to quickly walk back. After returning home, she threw down her bag and walked to the window to look out. It was still quiet downstairs and there was no hidden car driving away. It was so quiet that it seemed as though she had been overthinking for the past 3 days. Knock knock. Just as Feng Ling took off her coat and was about to prepare some dinner for herself, she suddenly heard someone knocking on the door. Hearing the rhythmic knocking, her hair instantly stood on end. She turned to look at the knocking door and walked over. Through the door, she was not sure who was standing outside. She only looked at the door coldly and thought of all the possibilities. Then she remembered that the other party's martial arts skills were above hers. Apart from that person, she really couldn't think of anyone else who would be bored enough to follow her. She abruptly opened the door and looked out coldly. However, she saw a middle-aged man in work uniform standing outside with a cardboard box in his hand. "Hello, Miss Ling, is this your express delivery?" Feng Ling looked at the box in his hand and then looked at the man in front of her. "When did you come up? I don't remember having anything to express. I have a habit of delivering packages from the upper floors, 1 floor at a time. There were 2 packages waiting to be delivered upstairs, so I came down directly from the safety escalator." The delivery man smiled politely at her and handed her a pen. "Please sign here." Feng Ling was puzzled and reached out to take the box. She saw that the address of the organizer of the close combat competition was written on the sender's side. Only then did she put down her guard, sign for it, and close the door. She opened the box and saw that there was a trophy and commemorative doll sent by the organizer. There was also a set of black combat uniform with the organizer's name printed on it. It was completely made according to her figure. After checking the things in the box, Feng Ling sat on the sofa and looked at the golden trophy. Suddenly she sighed and smiled. It seemed that she was thinking too much. She had been hiding carefully for so long. How could she find her? There were classes all day on weekends. Feng Ling took over 3 classes, not only Chen Beiqing's. The martial arts club was divided into 3 levels of learning courses: junior high and senior high. She taught all 3 levels. These students only had 3 classes a week on average, but all her classes added up to more than 6 hours a day. The busier her work was, the more fulfilling and stable her life was. The head coach and the boss of the martial arts club especially liked her because she was not afraid of hard work. As long as there was a need, as long as she could do it, she would not refuse. Other coaches always wanted to have a holiday on the weekend to accompany their families and girlfriends. Only Feng Ling had a full schedule every day and never took a day off. Even when she did have a holiday, she would sit in the coach's office and watch those basic martial arts moves. Once she did, she would watch them for a whole day. In the eyes of her colleagues and students, she didn't live like a woman at all. But she was beautiful and didn't even know it. She had a different kind of charm. There was one last class in the afternoon on Sunday. The other coaches had gone home, and only Feng Ling waited for the students in the martial arts club. When the students arrived one after another, she took a look at the time. There were still 10 minutes before the class began, so she continued to sit in the office. After a while, she got up with a cup and was about to pour herself a glass of water. However, as soon as she walked around the desk, she suddenly saw Chen Beiqing coming in with a large bouquet of red roses. Looking at the familiar bouquet of roses and then at Chen Beiqing who came with the roses in his arms, Feng Ling glanced at him indifferently and walked past him with the cup in her hand, not even looking at him. Chapter 10-12. Coach Ling, it's Christmas in 2 days. Let's go on a date. Chen Beiqing had long been used to her indifference. Seeing that she just went to the water dispenser by the wall to get water, he turned to look at her and said gently. Feng Ling patiently took the water and said coldly, "No, you can give up. I'm not interested in you." Chen Beiqing raised his eyebrows, put the bouquet of roses on her desk and turned to walk over. "I've been chasing you for so long. Can't you see that I really like you?" Feng Ling picked up the glass that had been filled, turned around and saw him standing next to her. She frowned. "Excuse me." Chen Beiqing didn't move aside. The young man was over 1.85 meters tall and looked very tall in front of her, who was about 1.7 meters tall. It seemed that only when he looked at her condescendingly could he feel that she was actually a little woman, not the cold-faced coach who usually stood in front of him coldly. Seeing that he didn't move aside, Feng Ling immediately looked at him coldly. "If you don't want to go to class, I'll go there later. If you're late for even 1 minute, I'll treat you as a truant. I'll go with you." Feng Ling looked at him speechlessly. "What on earth do you want to do? I like you and want to be your boyfriend." Chen Beiqing was very calm and then looked at her shoulder. "I'm sorry about the shoulder throw last time. I just wanted to see how it feels to successfully lift you up. I didn't want to hurt you. If I hurt you, I apologize." Feng Ling pursed her lips. "I didn't hurt you. You think too much. You're good at learning. You don't need to apologize to me. Hurry up and get ready for class." When she was about to turn and walk away, Chen Beiqing reached out and held her wrist. "Ling, I'm very curious about you. What kind of experience did a young girl have? How can you be so good at martial arts and have such a calm character? If you don't want to talk about your past, I don't mind, but since you have such a temper, it means that your past is not happy. From now on, I will give you happiness and happiness. Give me a chance, okay?" Feng Ling suddenly felt a little funny. These men were all like this. When they liked someone, they would confess and take it. When they didn't like someone anymore, or when they had to leave, they wouldn't give the woman any explanation. Such a thing as affection, isn't it the most untrustworthy? After 2 seconds of silence, she pulled her hand out of his. "Go to class. Don't talk nonsense. You're just a 20-year-old girl. Do you really think I'll believe the nonsense you told me back then? You lied about your age. According to the coach's profile, you're only 20 years old now. That is to say, when you helped me last year, you were only 19 years old. What's wrong with my age? Even if I'm 15, I can still beat you to the ground. This is a martial arts club, not a blind date. What right do you have to judge others? Here, let martial arts do the talking." Chen Beiqing smiled. "Sometimes I really feel sorry for you when you are clearly unhappy but still want to pretend to be mature." Feng Ling, she suddenly turned around and put the cup on the desk. She didn't drink the water and didn't bother to look at the flowers on the table. She tied her clothes and waist belt, turned to walk out of the office and was about to go to the classroom. Chen Beiqing was silent for a while. Standing at the door, he suddenly reached out to stop her. When Feng Ling turned to look at him in surprise, he put his long arm around her and was about to pull her into his arms again, but Feng Ling quickly raised her leg and kicked hard against his thigh. When Qin Beiqing's face changed and he lowered his head to glare at her, she easily pushed him forward, avoided his hug and walked out of the door. Master. She couldn't beat him. She couldn't even launch a gentle attack. After she left, Qin Beiqing rubbed his hand on his thigh and hissed. He looked back at the back of the woman who walked into the classroom. He helplessly raised his hand to touch his clean short hair and walked back into the classroom in frustration. When they entered the classroom, a group of male students saw that she and Qin Beiqing came in one after the other. They immediately whistled and asked, Coach Ling, tomorrow is Christmas Eve and the day after tomorrow is Christmas Day. What are you going to do? Do you have a date? Feng Ling was expressionless. I have classes tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Oh, what classes? Even if there are classes, I guess the students will ask for leave tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. I think you might as well take a break for 2 days. If you don't have any activities these 2 days, we'll treat you to dinner. Class. Feng Ling looked at them coldly. As soon as the group of male students received her gaze, they didn't dare to say a word and hurriedly got ready, but their eyes still glanced at her from time to time, and then at Qin Beiqing, who was expressionless. She wondered if Qin Beiqing had succeeded in pursuing her. It was almost Christmas, but he couldn't even ask her for a date. TSK. The so-called Christmas was an exciting festival for these international students. According to them, it was even more exciting than the New Year in China. It was a festival for young people, but Feng Ling, who was younger than them, couldn't feel any festive atmosphere at all. She had never celebrated any festival. 2 days later, on Christmas Day, all the students indeed asked for leave today. After refusing the invitation of several coaches to have dinner together, she drove back to her residence alone. In the past few days, it seemed that no one was following him, so he was more relaxed on the way back. There were many men and women wearing thick clothes walking side by side on the roadside. Occasionally he would pass by a huge Christmas tree, and he could often see couples from all over the world hugging and kissing under it. The whole street was full of red Santa Claus going out at night. Just like this, she watched the neon scenery and the crowd along the way until she drove back to her apartment. There were all kinds of colorful lights and a beautiful Christmas tree downstairs. After getting out of the car, Feng Ling looked at the Christmas tree over there. It seemed that every time there was such a lively festival, she could feel that she didn't fit in with this world. Walking towards the Christmas tree with all kinds of colorful lights hanging on it, she looked up at the big star at the top of the tree. Next to her, a little girl wearing a snow-white dress ran past with a big red apple-shaped light in her hand. As she ran, she turned around and told her parents her wish for this year in English. It seemed that they were all very happy. It seemed that no matter if it was lovers, friends, family, colleagues, or classmates, they would all have all kinds of people to accompany them. Feng Ling raised her hand and touched the snow hanging on the Christmas tree. It was cold to the bone. Just as she was about to turn, she suddenly saw a figure from the corner of her eye. Chapter 10:13. She even thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. In this world of ice and snow, the white fog drifting out of her mouth obscured half of her vision. Feng Ling narrowed her eyes and carefully looked in that direction but saw nothing. Her eyes darkened and she turned to look at her surroundings again. Still there was nothing. There shouldn't be anything. She turned to leave the Christmas tree, bought a bowl of instant noodles at the convenience store downstairs, and then returned to her residence. The elevator reached the 15th floor. The moment she stepped out, she sharply raised her eyes to look at the man standing in front of her residence. The man was dressed in black casual sportswear. His hands were in his trouser pockets and he leaned against the door leisurely. When he heard the elevator door open, he raised his eyes to look at her. His gaze shifted from her startled and cold gaze to the instant noodles in her hands. "You only bought one for me?" The man raised his cold brows slightly. His words sounded as though they hadn't seen each other for 2 years but had just been separated for 2 days. Feng Ling resisted the urge to crush the instant noodles in her hands. She looked at him expressionlessly and hesitated, wondering if she should return to the elevator and leave immediately before the elevator left. However, before she could make up her mind, the man had already taken his hands out of his trouser pockets. He casually stretched his arms to the sides and held them against the elevator doors. He looked down at Feng Ling, who had unconsciously taken a step back. "Do you want to go downstairs and talk in the cold wind of -10 degrees, or do you want to stand here and talk?" Feng Ling coldly looked at him. She knew that her heart was calm enough. Back then she was very calm, let alone now. However, Li Nanheng's sudden appearance was indeed unexpected to her. So, a few days ago he had already come to Boston. In the past few days when she felt someone behind her, It was him. She did not speak. She glanced at the number on the elevator door and said heavily, "Move." Li Nanheng looked at the expressionless little woman and watched her deeply. As she wished, his hand moved away from the elevator door. Feng Ling directly walked out through the gap in front of the door. She placed the instant noodles in her hands on the shelf in front of the door but had no intention of opening the door to enter. "What are you doing here?" She faced the door with her back to the man behind her. There was no warmth in her voice. "She's been missing for 2 years. I've been searching for her for 2 years. It's as if she had vanished from the face of the earth." Suddenly, one day, she appeared in all the major magazines as the national women's close combat champion. "Tell me, why am I here?" The man's voice was right behind her. His tone was calm, as if everything that had happened in the past 2 years had passed. As long as he found her now, everything would be fine. Feng Ling had a million pills of regret in her heart, but it was useless. When she participated in the competition, she was just looking for something to do because her life was too monotonous and boring. She had no idea that she would appear on TV and appear in magazines. She didn't expect that even though she was wearing a mask, people familiar with her could still recognize her. Even when Liqing could recognize her, let alone Li Nanheng. But she never thought that one day she would see him again. Feng Ling turned around and looked at the man behind her who was much taller than her. "Mr. Li, the reason why I left was not because I wanted to escape, but because I was forced to leave by several people in charge of the Li family. I lost all my face and was forced to leave. So, the so-called missing for 2 years and being searched for by someone for 2 years shouldn't exist. I have no reason to be searched for, and you have no reason to look for me. Now there's no need for me to be here." Looking at the young and inexperienced short-haired girl in the past, she had transformed into a petite woman with short hair over her ears in 2 years. However, her emotions and her expression were cold and unfamiliar. She didn't allow anyone to get close to her. Li Nanheng looked at her coldly and stepped forward. At the moment when Feng Ling took a step back defensively, he lowered his eyes and looked into her cold eyes. "What did you call me just now?" "Not boss, not Li Nanheng." "Mr. Li?" Feng Ling's voice was calm. "I'm no longer a member of 11 Base. What should I call you?" As she spoke, she suddenly felt that she didn't seem to have done anything wrong, and there was no need to escape. She raised her eyes and looked into his cold eyes. "Mr. Li, I've heard others say that it's common for men and women to fall in love, and it's also common for them to suddenly break up for no reason. Feelings come and go quickly, so I won't pursue any of the past with you, and please don't pester me because of that. Let's part on good terms." This is what I should have said 2 years ago, but unfortunately your grandfathers didn't give me a chance to say these words and asked me to leave. "Part on good terms?" Li Nanheng's eyes instantly sharpened. He lowered his head and approached her again. Feng Ling didn't expect him to suddenly lower his head. She took another step back and leaned against the door behind her. The man pressed down on her. Just as she was about to move away, he raised his hand and held her shoulders, pressing her firmly against the door. "Feng Ling, I've King searched for you for 2 years. Now you're telling me to part ways on good terms? Did I say I wanted to break up? Did I say feelings come and go quickly? When did I say I didn't want you?" Feng Ling thought she had heard wrong. For so many years she had always thought that Li Nanheng was rational. At least his 3 views should be normal. How could a married man say that he didn't want to break up with another woman? How could he say that he still wanted another woman? Even if she was very ignorant when it came to matters of the heart, she still knew what it meant to be a person. But she found that in the past 2 years, the things she had gained and the things she had lost in her heart had made her more stable. Especially regarding Li Nanheng's matter, she didn't want to pursue what was right or wrong, nor did she want to argue with him. Thus, she only looked at the man who pressed her against the door. She looked at the anger and pity hidden in his eyes for 2 years. She only looked at him calmly. "Oh, it's very simple. That is, I don't want you anymore. I don't want you anymore." Li Nanheng endured for 2 whole years, even though he knew that she was too strong and stubborn, and there were too many things that she couldn't easily accept. He finally found her. Seeing that her life was too peaceful, he couldn't bear to disturb her. But in the end, because she was alone under the Christmas tree, he wanted to hug her too much. But because he couldn't restrain himself for a moment, he finally waited for the knife that stabbed his heart 2 years later to return. The man's gaze was dark and heavy as he watched her. Without waiting for him to speak, Feng Ling said coldly, "Let go." Chapter 10:14. The man did not retreat, nor did he let go. He merely lowered his eyes to look at her. I've been walking alone for 2 years. Now that I've finally found you, do you think I'll let go so easily? What else can I do? Mr. Li, do you think I'll go back and be a shameless third party who knows I'm a third party? Feng Ling looked at him calmly. I'm very calm. It's been so long and I don't have any complaints or blame you. I won't pester you. What's there for you to pester me? Li Nanheng's grip on her shoulder tightened. Do you remember I told you to wait for me for 3 years? As if she had heard a joke, Feng Ling's expressionless face suddenly broke into a mocking sneer. She raised her hand and pushed his arm away. She took out the key to open the door and said indifferently with her back to him, I don't remember anything I shouldn't remember. Please go back. Feng Ling, give me a chance to explain. Some things can't be helped. It's also my responsibility. The door was opened. Feng Ling turned back to look at him. I know that many things can't be explained with just a few words. If you could explain, you would have explained it to me 2 years ago before you got married. There's no need to say anything now. I've already let it go. There's nothing to say. With that, she went straight into the room. The door suddenly met with some resistance. She turned to look at the man's hand on the door. She glanced at it coldly, put down his hand and turned to look at him. Do you want to come in? You used to be like this too. You said that if you want to break into my world, you must break in. No matter how many defenses I set up, they were broken by you again and again. In the end, you got what you wanted and left. Now, it seems that I can't stop you if you want to come in. What do you want? The short-haired girl in front of him no longer had the attitude of a young girl. Instead, she seemed to be in between a young girl and a woman. Her eyes were even colder than when she was in 11 base. In that coldness, there was a lot of experience and firmness that he had never experienced, and even a lot of calmness that he didn't want to see. Anger and haggling were the signs of deep love. Deep fear, hatred, and resentment were also signs of love. But there was nothing in her eyes. It was so faint that not even a trace of his existence could be found. Li Nanheng slowly put down his hand, looked at her for a long time and said hoarsely, Rest early. Feng Ling did not reply. She slammed the door with a ping and locked it from the inside, completely blocking the man's line of sight. Usually this room was very quiet, but tonight it seemed to be very lively outside. Because of this, her room was even quieter. It was unusually quiet. Feng Ling stood at the door and didn't even look at the closed door behind her. The next morning, the post-holiday atmosphere continued. When the curtains were drawn, one could see the world of ice and snow outside. There were also many couples who had woken up early, wearing thick clothes and jogging outside. The lights on the Christmas tree from last night had been turned off, but the colorful decorations on it still shone with all kinds of dazzling colors in the morning light. Feng Ling didn't have much to do in the morning. Most of her classes were after 10 in the morning or 1 in the afternoon. She fried an egg for herself and baked 2 pieces of bread. She casually smeared some blueberry-flavored jam, put a piece of vegetable leaf and a slice of ham on it, and cut it into pieces to eat as a sandwich. After eating, she put on her coat and prepared to go out for a run. Although she had already left the base and did not need to train every day, her living habits had long been formed. The exercises she taught the students in class every day were not enough. She still needed to run 2 or 3 kilometers every morning to feel comfortable. She had just opened the door and was about to step out when out of the corner of her eye, she suddenly saw the figure standing in front of the window by the corridor. She raised her eyes and saw Li Nanheng standing there. The man's back was against the morning light outside the window. She was startled, looked down at the time on her wrist and then looked at the man. Hearing the door open, Li Nanheng turned to look at her. Did you sleep well? She saw that the man was still wearing the same clothes from last night and smelled some smoke. She turned to see that there were a few more cigarette butts on the smoking box by the elevator. You were here last night? She turned back to look at him. At this moment, the man's back was facing the morning light outside the window. He looked at her and did not admit or deny it. He only said, At least I didn't disturb your rest last night. Feng Ling looked at him speechlessly, her eyes still cold. So you released second-hand smoke at my door? Li Nanheng's cold brows moved. He raised his eyes to look at the air conditioner and the passage that released the smoke. I saw the word smoking area written on the side of the safety stairs. Besides, your door is very good. The second-hand smoke shouldn't affect you. Feng Ling really admired Li Nanheng's shameless behavior. She held the door handle. Why are you waiting at my door? I have to go to work. I don't have time to deal with you. Didn't I let you go last night? Did I say I was leaving? Feng Ling frowned. So I don't want to talk to you. I've said everything I should say last night. I'll say it again. I've already let it go. I don't want to mention anything about the past. I have to go to work now. The man put one hand in his trouser pocket. He first lowered his head and smiled. Then he raised his eyebrows and turned to look at her. I don't want to talk to you now. You go to work. I won't disturb you. Then you can leave. I'll go where? Go back to the hotel, back to Los Angeles, back to the car, or back to where everything belongs to you. Go wherever you want. It has nothing to do with me. Who told you I lived in a hotel? I drove here. I've been in the car for the past few days. I haven't eaten or slept well. After seeing you, I was cut into pieces by your mouth again. I'm in a very bad mood right now. The man looked at her and said matter-of-factly, I stood outside your door all night last night. You should go to work. I'll go in and sleep. Feng Ling, you went into my house to sleep? Is there a problem? Feng Ling wondered if this man really didn't know what it meant to be shameless. I don't seem to have a reason to take you in. Last night, you were afraid that I would go in and do something to you, so I didn't go in to disturb you. Now you're going out. Let me go in and sleep for a while. No. No. Feng Ling refused very decisively. Chapter 10:15. There's a man in the family that I can't see. The man stared at her. Feng Ling's face was cold. No. Is there anything in the house that I can't see? No. Then why can't I go in and sleep? You could sleep anywhere, but you just had to sleep in my house. I've been standing outside all night. Do you want me to go back to the car and sleep? That's your business. I don't care. Li Nanheng looked at her for a while and coughed lightly. All right, I'll go back to the car. She saw that the man was indeed thinner than 2 years ago. It was not that his figure was thin. His figure had always been perfect, but his entire body felt thin. Obviously, he had not been living well in the past 2 years, and he really did not rest well in the past few days. Feng Ling looked at his back and did not feel her heart soften. She just looked at the many cigarette butts, the man's slightly messy hair, and his slightly haggard face. Indeed, there was nothing in her house that could not be seen by others. It was well behaved and not messy. There was nothing that could not be seen. Even if they were no longer in a relationship, even if she had let go of what happened in the past, he was still her boss. Did you really stand here the entire night without sleeping? She asked softly. The man who had already walked to the elevator door had his back facing her. He also glanced at the cigarette butts over there, then turned back to look at her from the corner of his eye. What do you think? You're already so sleepy, what's the point of being so cocky? Feng Ling looked at his back expressionlessly, pushed the door open and took a step out. Go in and sleep. I'll be home before 6:30 p.m. Leave before I get home. Don't let me see you when I come back. Li Nanheng looked back at her and she said, I'll take the key. Just close the door when you leave. Also, you're only allowed to sleep on the sofa. Don't touch anything else. Don't dirty my house. This time, Li Nanheng simply turned around and looked down at the woman who was almost in front of him. I'm a germaphobe. How dirty do you think I will be? Feng Ling did not speak but glanced at him again. Aren't you sleepy and need to sleep? If you don't go in, I'll lock the door. Li Nanheng looked at her sportswear and the bag in her hand. You don't pretend to be a man anymore. Why are you still so rude? Feng Ling couldn't be bothered with him. She pressed the elevator button and did not speak further. Seeing that she was really in a hurry to go out and obviously didn't want to talk, Li Nanheng didn't rush to say more. He glanced at her impatient and indifferent expression, turned and walked in. When he entered the door, he suddenly asked, Is there breakfast at home? No. Feng Ling stood in front of the elevator and responded coldly. Then why didn't you eat just now? Yes, I have. You didn't leave any? I don't raise a cat or a dog at home. I eat as much as I can. What's there to keep? Looking at the slowly rising number in the elevator, she said, There's bread in the fridge. If you want to eat it, bake it yourself. Well, I'm going to sleep first. I'll eat when I wake up. The man closed the door after he finished speaking. Feng Ling, looking at the elevator in front of him in silence, he felt upset no matter how he thought about it. She felt that she shouldn't have let him in. Although it was true that last night, he was very well behaved and didn't barge in as domineeringly as before. He was also very polite and stayed outside for the whole night. He didn't beg for forgiveness in front of her, nor did he pester her to explain, nor did he force himself on her. But now he was so shameless. It wasn't until the door was closed from the inside that Feng Ling realized what she was thinking. Why did she let him in? If he was too domineering, she would definitely reject him. But he seemed to be doing the opposite. The elevator door opened. There was no time to think too much. She walked into the elevator, looked back at the closed door, frowned slightly, and then closed the door. When she left the apartment building, she lost interest in running in the morning. She went to the parking lot and sat in the car. Feeling the ultra-low temperature outside the car for a whole night, she thought of the man who said that he had been sleeping in the car for the past few days. What did he want to do? If he knew her well enough, no, it should be said that he definitely knew her well enough. He should be very clear that no matter what, she and he could not go back to the way they were 2 years ago. It was also impossible for her to have any ambiguous feelings with a man who was already married, or to have feelings that were beyond reason. He should know that there was no need for him to stay here because there would be no result. 6 o'clock in the evening. It's time to get off work. Why haven't you left today? The head coach had just finished the last class of the day. When he entered the office, he saw Feng Ling sitting in front of the computer with a cup in her arms. Feng Ling looked up at him. Nothing. Sit in the office for a while. The weather is so cold. Why are you sitting here? It's so warm at home. The head coach smiled. Did you drive here? Do you need me to send you back? Yes, I can go back by myself. Feng Ling put down the cup and looked at the time. I'll leave at 6:30. The head coach looked at her again. Are you feeling unwell? No. Usually you go home on time after getting off work. Why don't you want to go back today? Feng Ling didn't answer but smiled slightly and still didn't speak. She was not sure whether Li Nanheng had left or not, nor did she know if he had woken up. She felt that if she went back a little later she might be able to miss him, but she was not sure. She would delay as long as she could. She already regretted letting him in. If it weren't for the fact that the weather was too cold, she would have strolled outside all night. It was 6:40 p.m. The lights inside and outside the martial arts club had been turned off, leaving only the office open. The area around the Polytechnic University was a school district with a very strict management system. Some of the martial arts dojos and the like must strictly follow the prescribed time to rest. If they continued to keep the lights on, they might be suspected of increasing the class time and might be investigated. Seeing that she couldn't delay any longer, Feng Ling got up to pack up and drove home. When she drove to the apartment, she looked up and found that the lights in the room were dim. Did this mean that Li Nanheng had already left? After staring up for a while, Feng Ling hesitated and got out of the car to go home. When she arrived at the door, she opened the door with the key and walked in. Looking at the dark room, she raised her hand and touched the wall. With a "pa" sound, the lights in the small living room suddenly turned on. Chapter 10:16. The moment the light returned, a man was lying on the small sofa that had always been empty. The moment the light came on, it was clearly too bright. The man frowned and casually grabbed a white pillow on the white carpet. He pressed it against his face and continued to sleep. The moment the light came on, it was clearly too bright. The man furrowed his brows and casually grabbed a white pillow on the white carpet. He pressed it against his face and continued to sleep. Feng Ling saw that he had not left and immediately stared coldly at the man on the sofa. She did not speak but raised her hand and placed it against the wall. She abruptly turned off the light. 5 seconds later she turned it back on, turned it off and turned it on again. After flashing for more than 10 times, the man finally could not take it anymore. He grabbed the useless pillow on his face and turned to look at her. What are you doing? Aren't you afraid that the light will be broken? Didn't I tell you that I would be back after 6:30 p.m.? I told you to leave before I came back. Isn't it enough for you to sleep here for a whole day? This time, Feng Ling turned on the light again and moved her hand away from the wall. Her expression was clearly not kind. Li Nanheng sat up on the sofa and raised his hand to push aside his slightly messy hair. He opened a pair of eyes that appeared to be very sleepy to say, I slept for a while when I came in this morning. Someone is renovating next door, so I didn't sleep well. In the afternoon I studied your toaster for a long time and didn't eat anything. I slept with an empty stomach until now. I'm guessing that I'm physically weak, so I slept for a long time and didn't wake up. Feng Ling, what a wonderful reason. If she didn't know how domineering and shameless Li Nanheng was, she would have really believed him. Seeing her standing in front of the door with a cold expression, Li Nanheng leaned against the sofa as if he hadn't slept well. The man who was nearly 1.9 meters tall sat on such a small sofa. He felt that he could stretch his legs out of the edge of the carpet. He leaned his head against the back of the sofa lazily and said hoarsely, someone really renovated it. Feng Ling had just said that she had lived here for so long and had never heard of anyone renovating. However, before she could speak, she suddenly heard the loud sound of an electric drill hitting the wall next door. She swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth. After restraining herself for a few seconds, she said, "No matter what, you've rested here. It's time to go." Li Nanheng stood up. Feng Ling saw that his black sportswear jacket was thrown to the side and that the iron-gray t-shirt on his body was slightly wrinkled due to sleeping. However, the wrinkles were inexplicably sexy, and the man's strong collarbone was almost exposed. Feng Ling calmly shifted her gaze away. "I'm going to wash my face." Li Nanheng did not say much and turned to enter the bathroom. At first, Feng Ling did not speak. However, when the man was about to enter her bedroom, her gaze suddenly changed. She abruptly raised her eyes to look over. Seeing that the man had already entered, she hurriedly followed him. By the time she reached the bedroom door, the man had already stepped into the bathroom. He was about to turn on the faucet when he saw something from the corner of his eye and turned to look. Feng Ling was about to shout, "Don't look." However, when the words were about to come out of her mouth, she felt that these two words were very strange. She couldn't help but stiffen. As expected, she saw the man's back stiffen for an instant. She was no longer dressed as a man. Although she wore sportswear every day, at least her underwear was normal. Every day, her underwear that she washed would be hung on a small drying rack above the bathroom. Right now there were two sets of underwear on it, one white and the other flesh-colored. There was also a set of black sports-style underwear that she was wearing. Li Nanheng was only stunned for a moment. It seemed that he had long been used to having no taboos wherever Feng Ling was. After all, she had never had these things in her room before. He turned to look at Feng Ling, who was looking a little awkward. Feng Ling was only embarrassed for a moment. She glanced at the faucet by his hand. "After washing your face, hurry up and leave." Li Nanheng did not say anything. He washed his hands in the slightly cold water for a while before lowering his head to wash his face. Feng Ling could not be bothered to look at him. She turned to leave. The man washed his face very quickly. He casually washed his face a few times. It was likely that he knew that she did not have much patience with him right now. He did not use her towel and directly walked out with his face wet. He casually wiped his face with his hands and walked to the coffee table to pull out a few pieces of tissue paper to wipe his face. As the man wiped the water that was about to drip down his chin, he said, "There's a problem with your toaster. I haven't eaten anything all day. Right now, even if I want to leave, I don't have the strength." Each reason was more lame than the other. Feng Ling had long expected that he would not leave so easily. However, she also lost her patience. She walked to the sofa, picked up his coat and threw it on him. "Even if you have to crawl, you have to get out." Li Nanheng received the coat and casually placed it in the crook of his arm. He then looked at her. "So heartless." Feng Ling sneered. "Heartless is also related to love. Don't think too highly of yourself. There's nothing to talk about between us. It's just that there's no need to keep a distance between us. Mr. Li, on account of the fact that you were my boss and that you took good care of me, I allowed you to come in and sleep for a day. However, I'm sorry, you have already exceeded my tolerance." Li Nanheng smiled. He suddenly threw the coat in his hand back onto the sofa. The smile in his eyes was gone. He looked at her and his voice was cold and angry. "Your tolerance? What did you think the 2 years you were missing meant to me? The beige chased you out and you ran away without a word. You didn't even think to look for me? Why would I look for you? Did you abandon your new wife, put aside your honeymoon period and return to the base to save me?" Feng Ling looked at him coldly. "Even if I, Feng Ling, am a child raised by a wolf and don't understand the ways of the world, at least I know my own limits." New wife? Honeymoon period? Li Nanheng suddenly wanted to curse. However, it seemed that he could only curse himself. Back then, he had rejected Feng Mingzhu, and because the relationship between the two families could not be too stiff, how could he have thought of marrying a child cenotaph? All along he had never had any concept of women. Back then, why didn't he think that he would really fall in love with a girl in this life? The man raised his hand and placed it on his forehead. He knocked himself hard twice. "Damn it," Feng Ling said coldly. "I remember that Feng Mingzhu hated me very much. It's probably because she saw the things between you and me. After all, you are her husband now. There are some things that you don't need me to remind you of. Please leave." Li Nanheng gritted his teeth. "I didn't marry Feng Mingzhu." Chapter 10:17. Feng Ling looked at him indifferently. "No matter who you marry, it has nothing to do with me. She bent down and picked up the pillow from the ground. Then, with a look of disgust on her face, she turned around and threw it into the dirty laundry basket, as if it couldn't be kept in her house unless it was washed. Looking at the little woman's obvious movements, every movement expressed her disgust, impatience and disgust towards him. Li Nanheng suddenly recalled the day when he was not in the base. For the next 700 days and nights, he couldn't sleep at night whenever he thought of it. She drank an entire bottle of brandy alone and was thrown to the ground in public the next day. All her secrets and truths were revealed. All her face, all her dignity and everything she insisted on were completely destroyed. Thinking about all of this, all of his unwillingness seemed to have turned into the fact that he deserved it. The man threw down his coat again. None of your business? Since you insist on looking at the past in this way, fine, I won't force you. Let's go for a meal? Feng Ling looked at him as if he was crazy and refused. I don't want to eat it. Li Nanheng didn't force her. He simply sat back on the sofa. Then I'll order takeout. I'll leave after eating. Before this, Feng Ling didn't believe that Li Nanheng would be so shameless. She looked at the man on the sofa coldly. Do you want to be a rogue to the end? The man crossed his legs calmly and answered, You. Can you beat me? Can you even push me? All the military and police in the United States are related to 11 base. Do you think you can get me away even if you call the police now? Let's order takeout. The man's tone was lazy and indifferent. He just sat on her sofa and didn't leave. Feng Ling took a deep breath and suddenly turned into the kitchen. She threw the remaining pieces of bread in front of him and placed a bottle of jam heavily in front of him. We'll leave immediately after eating. Li Nanheng glanced at the two things on the coffee table. He was not picky about food. He reached out to pick them up and looked at them. You let me eat this at noon, but I didn't eat it. Now you want me to eat it at night? Do you want to eat or not? If you don't want to eat, scram. Feng Ling's patience had reached its limit. Looking at this man who was even more shameless than 2 years ago, all her composure and indifference instantly turned into a violent emotion. She really wanted to kick him down from the 15th floor. Li Nanheng did not look at her. He casually picked up the bottle of jam, glanced at it and smiled. Blueberry. Feng Ling didn't have many sentimental feelings, but when she heard this, she suddenly remembered the blueberry cake he took her to eat. It seemed like she used to have a slight preference for blueberry-flavored things, but for some reason, it became an obsession. Everything seemed to be fixed on blueberry as the only option. She did not speak but glanced at the time. Can you finish it in 10 minutes? The man smeared the blueberry jam on the bread. In fact, the bread had been in the fridge for a whole day. It was not baked or heated. Even if it was not hard, it was definitely very cold and uncomfortable to eat. The man, on the other hand, took a few bites and ate the 2 pieces of bread with a bit of jam. Then he continued to smear on the bread. In less than 3 to 4 minutes, he had finished the remaining pieces of bread. After eating, the man slowly closed the lid of the jam and put it aside. He then looked at her. A very sumptuous meal. Not bad. Feng Ling. She was about to ask if there was something wrong with this man's brain when he had already stood up, picked up his coat and said indifferently, Sorry for disturbing. Then he left. The door opened and closed and the surroundings returned to silence. Finally she was alone again. Feng Ling silently looked at the jam on the coffee table and did not move for a long time. Feng Ling was sick. All the students were surprised to learn that Coach Ling, who had never taken a leave since working in the martial arts club, was sick and even took 2 days off. They wondered if something had happened. And the real reason was that after Li Nanheng left that night, Feng Ling always felt that the room was filled with that man's smell. The kitchen, the bathroom, the sofa, the living room, she seemed to be able to feel the traces of that man's existence wherever she went, even though he did not leave anything behind. So, on that cold night, she opened all the windows in the room, trying to release the man's unique smell and the faint scent of tobacco. However, because the windows were open for too long and it was too cold outside, the edge of the bedroom window was frozen and could not be closed tightly, so the wind leaked out at night. Feng Ling's bed was facing that window, and unfortunately she caught a cold from the cold wind that leaked in that night. The next morning she could not even get out of bed. The world was spinning around her. She reluctantly took out her mobile phone to call the manager and the boss to ask for a day off. Then she slept the whole day and did not wake up until the next morning. When she woke up, she did not feel like eating. She boiled some water, wrapped herself in a blanket, and sat on the sofa with a cup of hot water in her hands. She drank it in small sips and barely made it through the second day of her leave. She only asked for 1 day off, but the next day she was still sick and couldn't make it. The paper basket was full of paper towels to wipe her nose. She coughed one after another. She had never been so sick because of a cold since she was a child. She slept on the sofa for another day. That night, Feng Ling was about to go to the bathroom to take a hot bath to get rid of the illness, when suddenly there was a knock on the door. She was now very concerned about people who would suddenly knock on her door. Hearing the knock, she frowned and subconsciously didn't want to open the door. She just wanted to pretend to be dead in the room. The person outside knocked for a while but didn't hear any movement inside, so she quieted down. Just when Feng Ling was about to return to the bedroom, the phone on the bed suddenly rang. She walked over while sniffling. It turned out to be a call from Chen Beiqing. She picked up the phone in doubt. "Hello? Why don't you open the door? Aren't you sick and resting at home?" The person who knocked on the door was classmate Chen. Feng Ling paused and turned to walk out. When she opened the door, she saw Chen Beiqing standing outside, holding the phone that was talking to her. The moment he opened the door, he saw Feng Ling's slightly red nose. Chen Beiqing raised his eyebrows. "Are you really sick? I thought you were hiding from me. I want to chat with more like-minded people about young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life and find a confidant." Chapter 10:18. You think too highly of yourself. Would I not go to work just to avoid you? I'm someone who never asks for sick leave. Is there a need to do this? That's why I specifically asked the manager for your address and came over to take a look. Chen Beiqing didn't feel hurt by her direct retort. He smiled and raised a bowl of ginger soup he bought from outside. "Drink some ginger soup if you have a cold. When I was in China, every time I had a bad cold, the auntie at home would force me to drink this. Although it tastes bad, it really has a good effect on colds." Feng Ling glanced at it and reached out to receive it. "All right, thank you. I'll leave the ginger soup. You can go back." Chen Beiqing didn't dare to enter her place, but he still raised his eyebrows. "What? Am I going to eat you or what? I can't beat you. A starving camel is still bigger than a horse. Even if I catch a cold, I still can't beat you. What are you afraid of?" "It's not that I'm afraid. I'm a coach and you're a student. We still have to follow the etiquette," Feng Ling said calmly. "Is there anything else?" "If there's nothing else, I'm closing." Chen Beiqing looked at her again. "Have you eaten anything in the past 2 days?" "I ate it," Feng Ling lied. She looked sick, so he couldn't tell if she had eaten or not. But seeing that she didn't want him to go in at all, Chen Beiqing nodded. "Okay, it's the first time you've accepted something from me in more than a year. Even if it's just a bowl of ginger soup I bought from a restaurant, you've already accepted it. I'll work harder and one day you'll fall in love with me." "Feng Ling, you think too much. Have a good rest, I'm leaving." Chen Beiqing smiled at her, waved his hand and walked to the elevator. When he entered the elevator and Feng Ling was about to close the door, she suddenly heard the door next door suddenly open. She didn't want to care about what happened next door, but she seemed to see something from the corner of her eyes. She abruptly paused and turned her eyes abruptly. Li Nanheng, who would never appear here again, was standing at the door next door. He pushed the door open with one hand and held his coat with the other. He seemed to be preparing to go out, but his gaze paused on the bowl of ginger soup in her arms. "Did you catch a cold?" Feng Ling looked at him in disbelief and then at the door next door. She recalled that day when he said that the next door was being renovated. There was really the sound of an electric drill drilling the wall. Feng Ling, therefore, she had never seen what her next-door neighbor looked like. She only knew that she seemed to be a very old auntie. Could it be that in just a few days the house had changed owners? Or did Li Nanheng rent this house? Otherwise, how could he appear next door? Moreover, it was clear that he had been staying here for the past 2 days. There was only a wall between his bedroom and hers. He had never left. He was the one who hired the renovation that day? Li Nanheng walked over and Feng Ling abruptly returned to her senses. She looked straight at him. "What are you doing here? What do you think I'm doing? I've been looking for someone for 2 years. I can't possibly let you disappear just like that." Li Nanheng raised his hand and took the ginger soup from her hands. "Back then, I taught you the anti-investigation methods in the base. In the past 2 years, you've been using them against me. You're so good at using my spear to attack my shield. What else can I do other than guard the place closest to you?" Feng Ling didn't know if it was because she had caught a cold, but her reaction was slightly slow. When she recovered from his words, the man had already entered the kitchen with the bowl of ginger soup. She rushed in only to see that Li Nanheng had turned on the gas stove. "This ginger soup isn't hot enough. Heat it up before drinking it." Why did you suddenly catch a cold? I didn't see you come out for 2 days. I thought you were on vacation. If I had known that you were sick, it wouldn't have been that brat's turn to deliver ginger soup to your doorstep." Hearing the uneasiness in the man's tone, Feng Ling suddenly realized that Li Nanheng seemed to have changed. However, she couldn't tell what had changed, nor did he seem to have changed. However, although he was domineering, he suddenly had a sense of propriety. He wouldn't force her to do anything when she didn't have any feelings for him or even when he was already married. Or rather, he had something he was afraid of. Therefore, when it came to matters regarding her, he was no longer so straightforward. Instead, he treated her carefully, afraid that if he really ignited her fire, she would disappear completely. She couldn't describe what kind of feeling this was. In any case, looking at the man who was heating up the ginger soup for her, Feng Ling raised her hand to touch her forehead. She didn't want to speak. He had already moved next door. If she still said that she wanted to chase him away, it would be a joke. At most, they were only a few meters apart. He was still next door. Crazy. She really wanted to curse. However, right now, regardless of whether it was her strength or energy, she didn't have the strength to fight with this man. She simply didn't speak and sat on the sofa. She wrapped herself in the blanket and coughed a few times. A few minutes later, the man brought out the heated ginger soup and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. "Drink it." Feng Ling coughed again and raised her eyes to look at him. "The house next door, did you rent it or buy it?" "What's the difference?" "That's right. If he wanted to continue living here, whether it was renting or buying, he had his ways. After all, he was the young master of the Li family. Power and money were nothing to him. He was nothing like the ants in the world she had seen in the past 2 years. She raised the bowl to her mouth and the man reminded, "Be careful, it's hot." She paused and lowered her head to blow on the edge of the bowl. "The brat who brought you the ginger soup earlier, what's his relationship with you?" Li Nanheng stood opposite her and watched her holding the bowl and wrapped herself in the blanket. He asked with a heavy voice. As Feng Ling blew on the bowl, she lightly replied with a nasal voice, "He's my student." She didn't need to explain too much about herself. Since Li Nanheng had found her, he must have investigated the places she had worked in the past 2 years, the people she had interacted with, and everything that could be investigated. He must also be very clear about her current identity and job. "Student? A male student who specially came to deliver ginger soup to you?" The man's voice was low and cold. Feng Ling took a sip of the ginger soup and furrowed her brows. It was indeed very bad. It tasted extremely bad. It was hot and spicy, but it was undeniable that this thing could indeed make her body feel much warmer after 2 days of cold. "I want to chat with more like-minded people about young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life and find a confidant." Chapter 10:19. It doesn't matter who he is. After all, he's someone who cares about me. It doesn't seem like there's a need to be antagonized by anyone. Feng Ling's tone was direct. After taking another sip, she said, "Mr. Li, although I know my words may not have any effect, I advise you to take a clear look at yourself. Don't live next door to me anymore. Los Angeles is where you should go. This is Boston. Do I need you to tell me where I should go?" The man looked as if he knew what was going on. He didn't ask any more questions about the girl who gave him the ginger soup. However, his eyes were still filled with displeasure. He glanced at the time and picked up the keys she had left on the shoe rack in front of the door. "Why are you taking my key?" Feng Ling saw the man's movements. "You don't know how to go out and buy medicine when you're this sick? I'll go buy medicine for you." "Then why did you take my keys? What if you pretend to be dead inside and refuse to open the door for me after I buy the medicine?" The man said matter-of-factly. Feng Ling looked at him coldly. "You know I don't want to see you, but you still insist on pestering me? How come I didn't know that apart from being shameless, Mr. Li is also as hard to get rid of as sticky candy? You finally admit that you dumped me?" The man glanced back at her. Just as Feng Ling was about to flare up, he opened the door and walked out, closing the door. The door was shut without hesitation. Of course, because he had the key. However, when the door was closed, Feng Ling's expression was inexplicable. What was going on? In a relationship, shouldn't the first person to betray be the one who did the wrong thing? Why did Nanheng look as if she had dumped him? Feng Ling rolled her eyes at the door and raised the bowl in her hand to drink it up. In the end, she suddenly felt so hot and spicy that her whole body stiffened. She resisted the urge to spit it out and forced herself to swallow it. Half an hour later, the man opened the door as if he was opening his own house. Most of the apartment buildings near the Polytechnic University were slightly older. Some of them didn't have electronic room cards or fingerprint locks, so keys were needed. Hearing the movement of the keys in the man's hand, Feng Ling, who had finally finished the bowl of ginger soup, glanced at him and stood up to snatch the keys and the 2 boxes of medicine from his hand. "All right, I'll take my medicine before I sleep. You can go." Li Nanheng only raised his hand slightly, and her hand missed his. She failed to grab the keys and stumbled and almost fell into his arms. Feng Ling hurriedly took a step back and raised her eyes to look at the thing in his hand. She pursed her lips and her eyes were slightly impatient, but she could not be bothered to argue with him. The more she argued with this kind of man, the more excited he would be. She turned and walked back without looking at him. She remembered that the reason she had caught a cold was because of the man's smell in the room, which made her unable to sleep well. If she had known that he lived next door, she would have been prepared to come at any time. She had been frozen for a whole night and had fallen sick. Li Nanheng threw the keys back on the shoe rack, put the medicine on the coffee table and poured her a glass of water. "You just drank the ginger soup. Take the medicine in half an hour. Take the cold medicine and the anti-inflammatory medicine separately. If you don't remember to take it before you sleep, I'll call to remind you." "You know my current phone number?" Feng Ling asked subconsciously. "Is it strange?" The man looked at her. Feng Ling turned her head. It was not strange. He was Li Nanheng. Of course it was not strange. Seeing that she was unwilling to speak, Li Nanheng did not say more. He just walked around her room and said, "You haven't been out for 2 days. How did you catch a cold?" This was a very stupid and embarrassing reason, so Feng Ling did not say it. Li Nanheng had already entered her bedroom and checked the windows inside. The windows were now tightly closed and there was no air leaking in. However, the air was stuffy. He adjusted the air conditioner to a suitable temperature and looked back at the bathroom with the light on. He walked into the bathroom. Perhaps he did not think of anything, but he subconsciously glanced at the drying rack above. The 2 sets of cute underwear that had been hanging there had been put away. It was empty. Li Nanheng suddenly wanted to laugh at himself. He actually felt a little regretful. After checking that there was no other place in her room that could easily be exposed to the wind or cold, Li Nanheng did not force her to stay for long. Before leaving, he only told her to remember to take the medicine. When he returned to the next door, the man casually took out a bunch of keys from his pocket and put them on the shelf. He looked back at the things on the shelf, sighed and shook his head with a smile. Her anti-detection ability was indeed not bad, but she still lacked some life experience. She didn't know that she could get another key at any time. Fortunately, she had always hidden it well. Otherwise, if there really were a lot of men who had bad intentions towards her, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to guard against them. She wouldn't even know how her house was emptied. After all, she was still the Feng Ling who did not understand many things in the base but had a cold temperament. No matter what a person did, their nature would not change. Late at night, Feng Ling had slept at home for 2 days. After drinking the ginger soup, she felt hot all over and took the medicine. She remembered to take the anti-inflammatory medicine before going to bed. She was about to go to bed when her phone suddenly rang. She glanced at the caller ID. It was Los Angeles. Without thinking, she knew it was the man next door. She did not answer it but hung up and went to take the medicine. After taking the medicine, she turned off the light and went to sleep. After turning off the light and lying on the bed, she turned to look out the window and saw the light next door. Did this man like living next door so much? Back then, he used this trick to force her to stay next door, causing their daily lives to be inseparable. Now he was playing the same trick again? A married man. How shameless did he have to be to think that he could use the same trick to trap her heart again and again? Feng Ling retracted her cold gaze and closed her eyes, clearing the man who should no longer exist in her world from her mind. Li Nanheng saw that the light on her side was turned off and glanced at the phone that had been ruthlessly hung up. He put down the phone, opened the window of the balcony and walked out. The place she lived was very quiet. At 11 o'clock in the night, not a sound could be heard. The man lit a cigarette and there was a flickering spark between his fingers. He casually leaned against the balcony and puffed out a cloud of smoke into the night sky outside. He then turned his face to look at the tightly shut window next door and the dark room with the lights turned off. "I want to chat with more like-minded people about young Master Mo. Have you kissed enough? Talk about life and find a confidant." Chapter 10:20. 5th door was opened and closed. The door opened and closed. With Feng Ling's usual vigilance, she would be able to hear what was going on and would wake up. But her body was cold and hot and she was powerless. She felt as if someone had come in, but she also felt like she was dreaming. In the dream she seemed to have a slight fever. Someone's hand was placed on her forehead, and not long after an ice-cold towel was placed on her forehead. She didn't know how long she had been in this dream. She was half asleep and half awake. When she finally woke up again, it was already 9:20 am. She had asked for 2 days off. She had taken the first 2 days off, but she couldn't do it today. She had to attend a class today because several students who had just studied in the martial arts club for half a year were going to participate in a competition at school. School competitions paid more attention to specifications and forms, unlike real international competitions that required full strength. However, because they needed sufficient forms, they needed a qualified rehearsal and some forms and movements. She had to arrange them well today. Feng Ling sat up from the bed, took a look at the time, raised her hand to rub her still dizzy and swollen forehead, and got up to wash. When she saw the towel folded there in the bathroom, she was puzzled. She usually hung the towel there. Why was it folded here? She reached out to pick it up and found that the towel was still a little wet. She suddenly thought of the dream last night. She had a fever and someone came to take care of her. Was it Li Nanham? Feng Ling turned and walked out of the bedroom. She walked around all the rooms in the small house and didn't see anyone else. She remembered that he left before going to bed last night and didn't come again. She had closed the door and he had returned the key. How could he come here? She put it here after taking a shower last night. But it couldn't be folded here and it couldn't be dry now. She suddenly turned her eyes to the small balcony outside the window. The balcony on the 15th floor was different from the 2 adjacent balconies in 11 base. The width and distance between them couldn't be crossed easily. This was a matter of life and death. No matter what, Li Nanheng couldn't be so irrational. Then this towel, was it a dream or something? She didn't have much time to think. She quickly changed her clothes and went out. She hadn't recovered from the cold and couldn't drive. She didn't want to be a road killer, so she called a taxi and went to the martial arts club. Classes usually started at 10 a.m., but she was still 15 minutes late. Fortunately, she had called her boss and manager before 10 a.m. to say that she would be there soon, so the students were all waiting for her. After arriving, Feng Ling did not explain her illness. She changed into her usual clothes and entered the classroom. The students were very excited to see her, but they found that Coach Ling, who usually wouldn't sit down for a rest for several hours, had to drink some hot water every 10 minutes or so today, and she had to sit down for a while. Her voice was a little hoarse and she didn't look very well. There seemed to be some sweat on her forehead. Coach Ling, are you still ill? Did you catch a cold that bad? A few students saw that she was in a bad state and couldn't help but say a few words of concern. I'm fine. It's just a small cold. You guys continue to practice. Feng Ling stood up and walked over. Remember the posture of your hands and legs. Since you're all international students from China and want to show Asian culture and Chinese martial arts in front of students from all over the world, you've just learned for half a year, so you don't need to learn anything too profound for the time being. Just remember to do every movement correctly. With the classical rhythm of the Chinese style, it will definitely be very shocking. Continue to practice. The time before 12 noon today is all yours. If you can't do it, continue in the afternoon. Practice until you pass. But you look very tired. I'm fine. I'll sit for a while when I'm too tired. Feng Ling walked to one of the male students and reached out to straighten his arm. Raise it, straighten it, and lay it flat. Raise it like this, right? Coach Ling, your hands are very hot. Do you have a fever? The male student looked at her worriedly. Looking at her from such a close distance, he could clearly see that her lips were pale, and her hands were indeed abnormally hot. Feng Ling withdrew her hand and did not say much. She just turned and walked back, saying as she walked, "Why are you all looking at me? Continue to practice." Seeing that she insisted, they had no choice but to continue practicing. Coach Ling's temper was not something they could handle. Although she was younger than them, her temper was not something they could handle, so they continued to practice. Just after an hour of Feng Ling's class, the door of the martial arts classroom was suddenly pushed open with great force. The head coach and the boss of the martial arts club outside were both shocked and obviously failed to stop him. Looking at the tall man who walked in quickly, they looked at Feng Ling, who was sitting in front of the classroom and drinking water with some embarrassment. "Ah Ling, this gentleman said he came to see you. We said you were in class and it was not convenient for you to see him, but he was very angry and said that you haven't recovered and still have a fever. We actually failed to stop him," they said. "Actually, Who would have thought that Feng Ling's martial arts skills were amazing? It was really a waste of a talent like her to be a coach in their martial arts club, but they didn't expect that this gentleman seemed to be even better than Feng Ling. The head coach originally wanted to stop him, but he was kicked away and almost lost his life. Men always showed their true abilities, especially those who had learned martial arts since childhood. When they saw someone who was more powerful than them, even if they were not convinced, even if they didn't know what was going on in front of them, they still had some instinctive respect in their hearts and were more curious about who this gentleman was. He didn't seem to show his strength, but he was actually so powerful. Feng Ling. Li Nanheng's voice was unusually anxious. Come out and go back with me. Go back. Feng Ling didn't feel that her name was called here. Anyway, it was the same way. She just had an extra surname, a surname that she didn't want to touch anymore. She didn't look up, just looked at the cup of hot water in front of her as if it could bloom flowers, and took another sip of water. Come out with me first. Don't you know you have a fever? I know. I don't do anything here. At most, I just watch my students practice various movements here. I don't need to go on the field to perform. The fever won't kill me, so I don't need to continue to ask for leave. She put down the cup in her hand. I'm here to teach and work for others. Otherwise, the boss will give me so much money for nothing. There's no need to ask for leave all the time. Chapter 10:21. Feng Ling pulled out the chair next to her and sat on a slightly more comfortable chair. Boss, head coach, please send the irrelevant people out. Why are the others still in a daze? Continue practicing. Before he could finish his words, Zhang Xian grabbed his wrist. That person strode in from outside the door and grabbed her tightly, not backing down at all. Coach Ling, I have something to tell you. He didn't call her by her name again. Instead, he gave her respect and called her by her current title. He was so strong that she couldn't even pull her hand back. Can't you see that I'm in class? Mr. Li, are you always like this? Your matters are always the most important. You have to get what you want and you have to get the feelings you want. If you want others to wait for you for 3 years, they have to wait for you. No matter how unwilling or wrong they are, they have to listen to your wishes first. Others have to surround you for everything. You're the young master of the Li family, and I'm an orphan with no parents and no one to rely on, so I have to be bullied by you inside and out. After I get out of the place that belongs to you, do I have to continue to be tortured by you? Li Nanheng paused and let go. When her black and white eyes were fixed on his, he saw the coldness and wariness in her eyes, as well as the red blood vessels that appeared due to the cold and fever that had yet to subside. Other than the time when he had forced her to point her gun at him because he had kissed her forcefully and bullied her, she had never looked at him like this before. But it was this look that made Li Nanheng's heart, which had been in pain for 2 years, feel as if even the last drop of blood was about to be drained. The man wanted to say something, but he looked at her, who had been sitting on the chair coldly, and finally said, I'll wait for you outside. He turned around and walked out directly under the puzzled gazes of the martial arts club owner and the head coach. He even closed the door of the classroom. Under Feng Ling's cold instructions, the students who thought they were watching some love and hate drama hurriedly continued to practice, lest they provoked the cold-faced female coach who seemed to be in a bad mood. However, they could not help but occasionally look in Feng Ling's direction. So her name is Feng Ling. Which 0 is still the number 0? Or which 0 is a bell or a dewy sense of inspiration? It doesn't seem to match her style. Under the curious gazes of a group of people, the cup in Feng Ling's hand suddenly spilled on the ground. The full cup of water fell by her feet and splashed the edge of her trousers, but clearly she did not notice it herself. She still sat there expressionlessly, and her eyes were also indifferent. What are you looking at? Feng Ling looked at them expressionlessly. A group of male students thought absent-mindedly. The water in the cup seemed to be very hot. Did she not feel hot at all? Who was that man just now? For so long, they often discussed in private what kind of man could subdue a woman like Coach Ling. It seemed that Qin Beiqing, a rich young master, couldn't suppress her at all. But obviously, the man who just entered the door made them feel that Coach Ling was inferior in all aspects and aura. She raised her eyes to look at the short-haired woman sitting in front of her. She calmly picked up the glass of water from the ground and gently placed it to the side. If you keep looking at me, I'm going to dismiss the class. Don't come crying to me if you make a fool of yourself in front of all the students in the world. Li Nanheng looked at the time. Time passed by and Feng Ling still hadn't dismissed the class. He knew how serious she was about everything. She was still the same as before, but the nature of her work was different. But this morning she still had a high fever of 39 degrees. He stayed by her bed for several hours and fed her antipyretics, but it was obviously not effective. In the morning he went out to buy her some breakfast, but when he came back he found that this woman had gone to work. Thinking of the high temperature he felt when he held her wrist just now, the man felt that every minute and second in this room was torture. He opened the door outside, ignoring the owner of the martial arts club and the head coach beside him, intending to go out for some fresh air. The sound of the door closing was deafening. After hearing the sound of the door closing, Feng Ling finally withdrew from her cold and expressionless state and said to the male students who were practicing, "Practice for another half an hour and then rest. At 1 p.m. I'll check again. After confirming that there are no problems, we can end it. You guys continue. I'm going to the bathroom." She got up and walked out of the classroom. She saw the empty reception room and the head coach and boss who were looking at her curiously in front of the office door. She paused for a moment and did not say anything. She looked straight ahead and walked in the direction of the restroom. Feng Ling didn't go to the bathroom. She turned on the faucet and washed her face. The weather was cold and the water was also very cold. Most of the people in the martial arts club were air-conditioned, so the water in the pipe was not warm at all. It was as cold as the first frost and snow. She splashed some water on her face and the biting chill made her shiver all over. Looking up at the mirror, she saw herself wet. In the narrow space with plenty of light, her pale face had nowhere to hide. Because she was running a fever, there was a very light blush on her cheeks that didn't look particularly normal. If one didn't look closely they wouldn't be able to see it, but looking at the mirror at such a close distance they could still see it. She raised her hand and touched her forehead. Then she looked at her hand. Her fingers were white and tender, but there was a thin callus on her palm from holding a gun all year round. Although it was not obvious, it remained in her palm. Just like herself, after she stopped pretending to be a man, everyone who saw her said she was very beautiful and asked her why she cut her hair so short and cut off the last bit of femininity. She just smiled faintly and did not answer. Her hair, her life, just like her hands, looked beautiful to others, but no one knew that she had a thin callus in it that could never be wiped off. As she looked at the mirror, a drop of water rolled onto her palm. She thought she was crying, so she raised her head to look at the woman in the mirror. Her eyes were dry and other than a little bloodshot, there was no moisture at all. She didn't cry when she was kicked out of 11 base. She didn't cry when she learned that Li Nanheng was married. Of course she wouldn't cry now. In fact, she was a little surprised by her indifference. Why didn't she even shed a tear when she couldn't stand the pain? Feng Ling never thought of herself as a strong person. She only felt that she was a child who grew up drinking wolf's milk and was born with a heart of stone. She shouldn't have feelings. Chapter 1022. But at this moment she watched as the head of 11 base, the prestigious young master of the Li family, stayed in Boston because of her. Because of her, he disregarded his status and image and stepped into such a martial arts club. Thinking of the way the man looked at her just now, her emotions came so suddenly. She suddenly felt that humans were really animals that were easily dominated by emotions. People who shouldn't have feelings shouldn't have so many burdens. He's married, isn't he? Back then she had never thought of being stubborn, let alone now that he had been married for 2 years. The sound of running water under the tap seemed to cover up the ripples in her heart. Everything was still calm on the surface. She had been peacefully in class for nearly 2 hours, but at this moment, those words suddenly came to her mind. Every single word was drilled into his ears. Feng Ling is young. In fact, it's just a fruitless relationship. Even if she knows about this, she will be sad for a few days. Feng Ling, this kind of unknown orphan, compared to the eldest daughter of the Feng family, as long as one isn't stupid, they would know who to choose. Nowadays, which man would remain faithful to a woman until death? Liking someone doesn't mean he has to take responsibility. A silly girl like Feng Ling isn't suitable for him. People who don't belong to the same world shouldn't force their way in. She should get into a relationship while she's still young. When she grows up, she'll understand not to trust men so easily. This was the ending of the first love in her life. Hanjin was right. Li Nanheng had just given her a lesson. She had gotten what she should have gotten and lost what she should have lost. That included the first time that he had no memory of. She reeks of alcohol and can't even arrive on time for training. It's obvious that she had a hangover for an entire night. You say that she adheres to the rules of the base and that her character is worthy of being tested? We're already being polite enough not to have someone strip you naked. Do you think you can still stay in 11 base? They ridiculed her for being a woman, for disguising herself as a man in the base, for living a disorderly life among men, for being an orphan without any parental discipline, and for easily trusting the feelings of others. She had always thought that Li Nanheng was different. She thought that this man, who could be cold to the bones to others but doted on her to the bones, treated her differently. She thought that he was sincere enough and that he could see the good in her. Feng Ling placed her hand on the ice-cold pool and tossed and turned. She thought about all the questions that she had never thought about 2 years ago. She thought that he was different. But the truth was that he was more ruthless than any of them. There wasn't even an explanation. The old man of the Li family made her embarrass herself in front of everyone in the base and drove her away. It was said that Li Nanheng had been looking for her for 2 years, but today she saw clearly that this man was no different from 2 years ago. When she had a fever this morning, he had indeed entered her home. She didn't even know how he made a copy of her key. If she wanted to fight with this man, she always seemed to be too immature and silly. His family background gave him enough confidence to do whatever he wanted. Even if he knew that she was indifferent to him, he could still find ways to sneak into her life. He was an arrogant man who trampled on her heart and her self-esteem. Whether it was to help her, protect her, or hurt her, he just treated her as an ant and easily wanted to control her heart and her life. It had been 2 years. She had long said goodbye to those past lives. She wanted to stay far away from him. The farther away from him, the better. Feng Ling held the cold pool with force and her fingertips turned white. They were neither relatives nor friends. They just had a relationship that came and went like the wind. They had written a thick brush stroke in the past of their youth. What was there to affect their mood? She closed her eyes. The next second, scattered scenes appeared out of thin air. She fell into a man's bathtub in the sauna room of the orphanage and fought with him. When she first entered the base, she had a written test with a man on the training ground. Her moves were fierce, which made him feel that something was wrong, but he let her go and didn't investigate further. When she was on a mission, he suddenly appeared and helped her solve the problem behind her. When she fell into the sea on the cruise ship, he was on the other side of the more dangerous terrorist enemy zone. When she was lost on the island, his helicopter suddenly appeared. The mission in the bar, she was dressed as a woman, he pressed her against the wall and kissed her. He blocked bullets for her, he did everything for her. They were together on Roger's Pass day and night. When she killed the commander in the military, he protected her behind him and helped her solve problems again and again. When she was almost killed by the snake, he appeared again and left a small cross scar on her shoulder. He said that she was only 17 years old and was still too young. He asked her to wait for him for 3 years. 3 years later, he would marry her. Feng Ling opened her eyes, looked at herself in the mirror, and pushed back the wet hair and fringe on her forehead. The woman's delicate and white face still looked a little handsome because of this action, but the fringe immediately fell down again. Even though her hair was short, she still looked like a young girl. She could never be a real man. Just like how she would never be able to accept a man who was already married. This was a problem that could never be solved in the world. That's it, Feng Ling. He's not worth you thinking about any longer. For the rest of the time, Feng Ling went back to class as if nothing had happened. When it was time for the lunch break, the male students came up one by one to help her back to the office to rest, but she refused. Coach Ling, your name is Feng Ling? Which zero? Someone asked her. Feng Ling didn't answer but just glanced at him coldly, and the other party left dejectedly. She was about to go back to the office, but the head coach was waiting for her in the office. Why didn't you call me to tell me that you're not feeling well after class? Today's classes are just basic lessons. I'll help you look after them. The head coach looked into her eyes. By the way, that man is still outside. Feng Ling nodded and didn't say much. Obviously, she didn't want to go out to see him. Seeing her sitting back at the desk calmly, the head coach asked again, "Who is this man? Did you know him before?" She was silent for a moment. No matter who he is, you never care about these things. Why did you suddenly ask me today? Because a kid like Chen Beiqing is no match for me. Although the person who came today didn't say much, I felt a clear sense of crisis. At first, Feng Ling didn't understand. After a moment, she looked in surprise at the head coach who was standing in front of the office door with a serious expression. At the same time, she saw the man behind him approaching. Chapter 1023. Seeing the man approaching, Feng Ling didn't speak anymore, but the head coach's words still startled her. For more than a year, the manager had been taking care of her like an elder. Furthermore, he seemed to be 31 or 32 years old. She had always regarded him as a mentor and helpful friend. She had never thought that he would have other thoughts about her. How could a woman like her, who didn't even have any femininity, be worthy of a man's love? Just her fists alone? The manager sensed the slightly cold gaze behind him. His gaze paused for a moment before he abruptly turned to look at the tall man approaching from behind. Li Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket and held a box of antipyretics that he had just bought from the pharmacy next to the martial arts club. He looked at him coldly and stared straight into his eyes. If you can sense the crisis, it means that you are a smart person. Head coach, you can go back to work first. Feng Ling didn't want the past between her and Li Nanheng to affect others, nor did she want those things to be heard by others. The head coach stood in front of the door without moving. Instead, he looked straight into Li Nanheng's eyes. At the same time, when Li Nanheng was about to enter the door, he suddenly raised his hand and blocked the man's footsteps with one arm. Li Nanheng didn't speak. He glanced at the arm in front of him and then raised his eyebrows to look at him. He didn't speak and even suddenly smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Even Feng Ling, who was sitting behind the desk not far away, vaguely felt a sense of cold danger. Ah Ling is a member of our martial arts club. No matter what your relationship with her is, if she doesn't want to see you and doesn't intend to have anything to do with you, everyone here has the responsibility and obligation to protect her. Sir, I think Ah Ling obviously doesn't want to see you. The head coach also looked fearlessly at the man who was taller than him, a person who practiced martial arts all year round. His eyes were firm. Which eye of yours saw that she didn't want to see me? Li Nanheng was indifferent. Feng Ling originally wanted to say, I really don't want to see you, but at the same time she felt that if she said this the head coach would definitely be angry, so she did not speak, but just stood up and walked over. Just as she reached the door, the head coach suddenly turned around and stood in front of her, shielding her behind him as he said, It's okay, I'm here. Feng Ling looked at the tall man in front of her. When she met Li Nanheng's cold gaze, she suddenly glanced at the medicine in his hand. Li Nanheng didn't say much. He just looked at her and handed the medicine box to her. Take the medicine first. The head coach did not speak. He looked at him and then turned back to look at Feng Ling. My fever is not serious anymore. Feng Ling said lightly, I don't need to take medicine. I've been drinking as much water as possible, so it won't be a big problem. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Li, but your concern is really misplaced. You should be concerned about your wife, not me. Hearing this, the head coach didn't know Li Nanheng's identity. Hearing this, his gaze instantly changed and he stared coldly at the man in front of him. Married? Li Nanheng completely ignored the person in front of him and only looked at Feng Ling indifferently. I asked you to take the medicine. Are you reminding yourself or someone else? Feng Ling didn't want to talk to him anymore, so she simply took the medicine and said, Head coach, you go ahead. I'll talk to him alone. Thank you. The head coach was unhappy because this man was married, but hearing Feng Ling's cold and polite voice, he hesitated and simply gave Li Nanheng a warning look. Regardless of whether Li Nanheng paid attention to his gaze or not, he said in a low voice, I'm in the office next door. Call me anytime. Feng Ling didn't speak. When the head coach left, she raised her hand to Li Nanheng. Give me the key. Li Nanheng's cold brows moved. Because the man in the way had left, the coldness in his eyes dissipated a lot. He looked at her in front of the door. What key? Li Nanheng, don't play dumb with me. When I was still sleeping in the early morning, did you enter my house again? When you took the key out last night, did you directly duplicate the key? Feng Ling looked at him coldly. Give me the key. He didn't expect that although this little woman didn't have much life experience, she was clearly not as easy to fool as before. After all, she had lived outside for 2 years. These 2 years were 2 years that he couldn't fully control and only belonged to her. Li Nanheng smiled. But I made more than one copy. Can you be sure that if I give you a key now, I won't have a second copy in my hand? Feng Ling, then give me both. What if I made 10 copies yesterday? Or more? Li Nanheng, what do you want? Feng Ling suddenly put down her hand, her eyes impatient. It's not good for you to pester me like this. You're sick. You had a fever in the early morning. I want to take care of you. Is this pestering? I know you're seriously ill, but you still ran out to work. I told you to go back. Is this pestering? The man took a step forward, stood in front of her, and looked down at her. If caring for you is pestering, then what about that thing just now? Who is the so-called student who sent you the ginger soup? I don't allow you to go to work when you're sick. Is this pestering? Feng Ling didn't want to argue with him. She just frowned and said, I have to work in the afternoon. I don't have the energy to talk nonsense with you here. I'm warning you, bring me the keys before I go home tonight. Don't casually enter my house again. With that, Feng Ling took the medicine and turned away. She did not look at him again. She returned to the desk and said before sitting down, "This martial arts club is my area. Please don't come here again, Mr. Li." Li Nanheng stood there without moving. Feng Ling sat behind the desk and looked up at him. "Why aren't you leaving?" Li Nanheng was silent for a moment. He walked in, pulled out a chair in front of the desk and sat down. Seeing that he didn't speak but just sat there, Feng Ling looked at him in confusion. "I'm watching you take the medicine." The man glanced at the glass of water in front of her. Feng Ling was silent for a moment, opened the medicine box impatiently, took out 2 pills, and was about to swallow them when the man's voice came again. "Don't you know how to take the medicine before taking it? Just 1 is enough." Feng Ling paused. She did not look at the man but looked down at the instructions written on the medicine box. As he said, she only took 1 pill at a time. It was not good for the body if the medicine was too much. She pursed her lips, put a pill into her mouth, picked up the water, took 2 sips and put it down. "All right, can I go?" She looked at Li Nanheng. Read the latest chapter of Love is Not Comparable to Your Claw Book House for free. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.